Newbury, we have over 5,200 women who have been unfairly affected by changes to the state pension age. These women were wronged through no fault of their own, and they deserve justice. With a High Court hearing due in December, this could be a crucial moment for the government to finally do the right thing. So will the Secretary of State now listen to the Ombudsman's recommendations and commit to providing compensation to WASPy women?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have to remind the honourable member that his party supported the acceleration in the rise of the basic state pension age when they were in government, and that has given rise to some of the questions he's raising today. Now, Mr. Speaker, you would not expect me to comment on ongoing litigation, and I won't do that, but I can assure him and the House that we'll take all relevant factors into account when considering the process for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Previous to my election to this place, I worked for a homeless charity in Harlow called Streets to Homes. One of the cases involved a man who was homeless due to delays in getting his state pension. Can I ask how the department ensuring delays like this aren't commonplace?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we hope that those entitled to the basic state pension receive a seamless and fast service. This is a pension that people contribute to throughout their lives, and when they reach state pension age, we of course hope that they get it as soon as possible.
Bobby Dean.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer this question together with questions 9 and 11. Access to work does a very important job, but current delays with the scheme and our ambition for an 80% rate of employment point to the need for reform. The consultation launched in the Pathways to Work Green Paper closed on the 30th of June. We're now reviewing all aspects of the scheme in light of the responses that we received.
Bobby Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I had a constituent come to my surgery the other week, and they felt pretty frustrated that the Access to Work scheme that once supported them was pulling the rug beneath their feet as they progressed through their career. My constituent has been a model example. He has not let his multiple neurodivergent diagnoses hold him back. He has worked hard, and with support, he's earned a promotion into sort of a deputy leadership position. But it's at this point that DWP decided to reassess him, and they have downgraded his support. Right at the moment, he felt he needed to maintain that support with his new responsibilities. So can you assure us that when these reforms come, they will look to make sure that people can be supported through progress in their career as well as into work in the first place?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a good point. Obviously, I don't know about the details of the case that he's referred to, but it is important that access to work and our wider employment support enables people not just to get into work, but to thrive once they're there, exactly as he says.
Marshall Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to work, the Access to Work scheme provides vital support, and it's one of the best forms of support for blind and partially sighted workers. But when their cases or their awards come up for review, they are finding that their support and awards are being significantly reduced. Now, given the government's commitment to keeping Britain working, can the Minister tell me or explain why blind and partially sighted people are seeing their support cut? And will he agree to meet with me and other sightless organisations to see how we can address some of these challenges within the scheme?
Well, I say to my honourable friends, there's been absolutely no change in the policy on access to work, but what has happened is there has been more scrupulous application of the existing policy and guidance over the last year. That means that the awards that have been given from access to work have been more consistent, but I do know there have been cases where support has been reduced. I'm looking forward to attending the forthcoming meeting of the all-party group that she chairs on eye health, and that might perhaps give us an opportunity to discuss the issues that she's raised.
Martin Wrigley.
Mr. Speaker, on 20th of May, I met with the Minister to speak about access to work claims that were being denied, changed or reduced, all contrary to the guidelines. The Minister assured me this was a communications issue and the guidelines hadn't changed and that officials were going to fix the problem, speaking to the local job centre. The problems weren't fixed. Since then, both Dawlish Gardens Trust and the No Limits Cafe in Newton Abbot have ceased to provide access to work services because the system just isn't working, and they said every claim was being rejected, and this has been mirrored by the Access to Work Collective. I asked the Minister who changed the guidelines and why, or are they simply being ignored to save money at the cost of vulnerable adults? If the Minister would like more information, I would be happy to meet with him again.
very happy to meet with him again, but I can assure him the policy has not changed. In fact, we just published last week the spending figures on access to work, and spending went up 17% in the last year. It went up 32% in the year before that. So I don't know what's happened in the particular case that he's referring to, but I'd be very happy to have a further look at it.
David Beckham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, access to work is absolutely vital, and I agree that at the high end of the scale, sometimes it can be more expensive. But I have a very senior person in the world of theatre in my constituency, running Grey Eye Theatre indeed, and she requires access to work. But even with the right support, there's not enough for the needs that she has, because she needs a British Sign Language interpreter with her at all times. They are at the pinnacle of assessing what people need, and are very good. And I would love to invite the Minister to visit Grey Eye Theatres, because they are great at supporting disabled people into work, with access to work support and without.
Minister.
Well, I am aware that a big chunk of access to work does go to interpretation for British Sign Language, and it's not unusual for people who draw on that support to hit the cap, which increased last year. It's now £69,920 per year. We clearly will look at that, along with all other aspects of the scheme, in the review that we are undertaking at the moment.
Shadow Minister Mark Garner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, back in May last year, the party opposite, whilst in opposition, was outraged to learn that average processing time for applications to the Access to Work programme was running at fully 43.9 days. In fact, so outraged was the Labour Party that they'd made it a manifesto pledge to tackle this very specific problem. Now, Mr. Speaker, after more than 15 months of a Labour government, it seems that far from slashing waiting times, applicants now have to wait an average of 93.6 days. That is more than twice the waiting times under the previous government. A year in government, Mr. Speaker, and the Labour Party has doubled the misery and uncertainty suffered by disabled people. Why?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're fixing the very, very serious problems left behind by the previous government. On access to work, the number of people processing the applications has been increased by 118 since May of last year. But the honourable gentleman is right, the delays are still a problem. That points very clearly to the need for reform, and that's what we're getting on with.
Shanker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want every young person in Derby. Question number 3.
Excellent. Secretary.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer question 3 together with question 6. Skills are vital to give young people opportunity, economic growth and the country's renewal. That's why, as part of our Youth Guarantee, we are increasing short courses for high-demand sectors like AI and construction, expanding the number of youth hubs and partnering with sports clubs to get help to people where they are in the community. And last week we published the Skills White Paper, which sets out the next steps to train the workforce of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I still want every young person in Derby to see technical education and apprenticeships as first-class, not second-best routes to success. University technical colleges where students are 4 times more likely to process onto apprenticeships are key to unlocking that success. Will my right honourable friend meet with Pride Park UTC to discuss their plans to give young people in Derby real choice and real opportunity by rolling out a new technical centre in our city?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend has spoken often about this, and I believe he started his career as an apprentice. And as a former Rolls-Royce worker, he'll have noted the Skills White Paper, and of course he knows all about the importance of that company to the City of Derby. Let me congratulate Pride Park UTC on their plans to have a new technical skills centre, and I will ensure that he gets a meeting with me or with the relevant minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My committee's recent report on further education and skills highlights the poor level of information on vocational and technical training opportunities, including apprenticeships, currently available to young people while they are in school. And we recommend that UCAS should be expanded to provide a single portal for information on academic, vocational and technical opportunities, so that every young person is aware of how they can train in the skills they need to access a good job. Will the Secretary of State consider this recommendation and work with the Department for Education to deliver it?
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome that question. I think the Honourable Lady raises a very important point. If we are going to have equal status for HE and apprenticeship routes, we should also look at how the information about these is disseminated to potential applicants, and I hope she's pleased to hear that I've already asked the Department to begin work in this area.
David Lammy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the worries with the new regime and Skills England is the loss of independence and the guaranteed business voice written into law that existed with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. How will the Secretary of State ensure that business does have a voice, setting standards and making sure those standards are upheld so that everybody can have confidence in the changed system?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is quite right to say that the business voice and the employer's voice in this is very important. And when I wrote the new remit letter to Skills England, I specifically asked them to take into account the views of employers, because it is very important that in the skills system we are training people in a way that employers want and that meets the future demands of the labour market.
Ashley Fox.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State to his place with his new responsibility for skills. The government has recently reduced the amount of funding for Level 7 apprenticeships. So can he tell the House what assessment his department have made of the potential impact of this reduced funding on the number of nurses in training?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the apprenticeship and skills budget, like every other budget, does demand choices. We are choosing to prioritise the levels that we need in the economy, where the value is greatest. That does imply certain choices, and I'm confident that the choices we've made will benefit the workforce as a whole and future opportunities.
Brace.
Please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer this question with question 23. We are determined to open up opportunities in work for people with health conditions. The Keep Britain Working Review we publish soon. In Pathways to Work, we have 1,000 work advisors supporting this group, and will devolve powers so areas can shape their own joined-up local work, health and skills offer.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Plus in Exeter, who support people with living with physical disabilities and mental health conditions back into employment. I met some of the fantastically committed mentors who provide tailored training and support, helping hundreds of people who have been long-term unemployed into meaningful jobs, boosting their confidence and helping them to rebuild their lives. Does the Minister agree with me that under the last Tory government, disability employment was shockingly neglected, in contrast to this government's recent announcement about Connect to Work funding for Devon, which will help many more people back into the workplace?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The disability employment gap has been stuck around 30 percentage points ever since 2010. The example that he refers to in his constituency sounds like a great example of exactly the kind of resource we want to draw on in local areas, in each local area, to make sure that disabled people have the opportunities in work that they've been denied in the past.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mobility is a lifeline for people with disabilities, for getting to health appointments, studying, maintaining employment and so much more. Cuts to the scheme risk increased health needs and increased unemployment, likely to cost much more than any short-term savings. Does my right honourable friend agree that before any proposed cuts, a proper impact assessment is absolutely vital?
I can assure my honourable friend that there will be no changes to the eligibility conditions for the PIP mobility component, or indeed other aspects of PIP, until the conclusion of the review, which I will be leading and co-producing with disabled people, and that's expected to report in the autumn of next year.
Sir Julian Lewis.
When severe mental illness strikes, it can be devastating and totally debilitating. But the problem from his department's point of view is that its symptoms are invisible. There have been reports about people faking mental illness in order to gain benefits. Is he satisfied that his department has appropriate checks in place?
Minister.
Yes, I think appropriate checks are in place, but as I've just mentioned, we are undertaking this review of the PIP assessment, and we will need to look carefully, and we'll be doing this together with disabled people, look carefully at the way these decisions and judgments are made.
Shocker, Adam.
Speaker, at a recent roundtable at the Ayers Monsell Club for Young People in my constituency of Leicester South, parents told me that their young adults with learning difficulties who volunteered for years, often with major supermarkets, still struggle to secure work. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure young people with high-functioning learning disabilities in long-term volunteering roles can access clear pathways into paid employment?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very good point, and he will have seen, as many will have done, recent publicity about a particular case of this kind. At the moment, the proportion of young people with severe learning disabilities, or indeed people with severe learning disabilities who are in employment, is tiny. So we're working with employers and some very good supported internship programs in the hope of opening up opportunities for work, and I hope we're going to see many more opportunities in the future. We appointed an expert panel earlier this year to look at how better to support people with neurodivergence into work, and they're coming forward with some interesting proposals.
Chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, recently Health Equity North produced an analysis for the Select Committee which revealed that just getting 5% of people with disabilities or health conditions into employment would yield cost savings of over £12 billion. So my question to my right honourable friend is what progress is being made with employers to enable these sick and disabled people who want to and are able to work, get them into employment?
Minister. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right and raises a very important point, and I agree with her about the tremendous value for the people who benefit and for the economy more widely of opening up opportunities in employment in the way that she describes. This is, of course, is exactly what the Keep Britain Working review, being led for us by Sir Charlie Mayfield, is looking at. And I'm looking forward, and I'm sure she'll find extremely interesting, the report from Sir Charlie, which I'm expecting to be published now quite soon.
Gideon Amos.
Mr. Speaker, 4,000 people in Somerset, many of them with disabilities, being transitioned from employment support allowance to universal credit. They were assured they wouldn't lose out, but one constituent waited 3 months with absolutely no income at all until my intervention and the department's intervention. And Somerset were also not warned of this transition, which causing huge difficulties for the county to assess council tax benefit implications. What steps will the Minister take to make sure people do not lose out, which is what they were told would happen in the transition to universal credit?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure why the news of this transition didn't reach Somerset, but the plans have been quite well publicised, I think, and we have put in place a very careful enhanced support journey for people, including quite a number of people on ESA who might struggle with the transition. So if there's a particular case, and I think he's raised one, if there are other particular cases where there are difficulties, then we are able to provide extra support to make sure that people can make that transition without hardship.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
So Ben? Oh, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, 975,000 people are being paid carers allowance in England and Wales, including some 900 in the honourable member's constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know carers give everything to care for their loved ones, and that's both physically, emotionally, and also financially. The government received the carers report 3 months ago, and under Lib Dem pressure has agreed to publish this by the end of the year. Do we know how many carers are going to be sort of unfairly penalised in the 6 months between the government receiving the report and publishing it?
Minister.
Well, I agree with the honourable member's characterisation of the degree of commitment and sacrifice that very large numbers of carers are making all across the country. As he's said, the report which we commissioned from Liz Sayce is going to be published together with the government's response to that report by the end of the year, and the question that he's asking will be addressed in that response.
Justine Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 7.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When we came to office, there were almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. And this government is determined to offer young people proper opportunities. Our youth guarantee will ensure that 18 to 21-year-olds are learning or earning, helping to prevent them become economically inactive almost before their careers have even begun. And as part of this, my honourable friend might have seen that the Chancellor announced a jobs guarantee scheme would be part of this in the future.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With 1 in 6 young Scots not in education, employment or training, including hundreds across my constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow, I welcome the Government's youth guarantee to give young people the training or job support they need. However, with stubborn youth unemployment, the Scottish Government's swinging cuts to the college sector and employers warning Scottish apprenticeships are less favourable than those in England, how will he work to ensure young people across the UK can benefit from this Government's ambition?
Well, Mr Speaker, not for the first time we have to point out that the Scottish Government has benefited from the biggest financial settlement since the introduction of devolution, and it shouldn't be too much to expect that at least a proportion of that should be spent on expanding opportunity for young people in her constituency and throughout Scotland. And Scotland has given so much to the world in terms of creativity and innovation. It is absolutely critical that the next generation of young Scots gets the chance to do the same.
Tim Farrell.
Mr Speaker, skills boot camps in Cumbria provided a great opportunity, 60 hours of training for young people in disciplines as varied as coding, scaffolding and project management. It cost 2.7 million across the whole of Cumbria to deliver that. Chicken feed really compared to the benefit that those young people and their future employers get out of it. What conversations has he had with his friends in the Treasury to make sure that scheme is maintained and continued?
Seriously?
Well, I'm always having conversations with my friends in the Treasury, but I do agree with him that flexibility and some short courses in the skills and training system is very important. Not everything has to be done according to the exact same formula and recipe, and I do think that shorter training courses have a big part to play.
Secretary of State Helen Wayner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I welcome the right honourable gentleman and wish him luck in his new job, especially because every day that passes under this government we see fewer people enjoying that chance to start a new job. Unemployment has gone up month after month. Nearly 1 million young people aren't in education, employment or training because of this government's policies, their jobs tax and their business red tape. Even the Pension Minister's former think tank agrees with me on this. There are people all around the country out looking for work, young people who want to get on in life, all those people trying to provide for their families. So please can he tell us and tell them, when will he get unemployment down?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, she has a short memory because the government that she served in presided over the biggest slowdown in living standards in recent memory, and there are 358,000 more people in work than there were at the start of the year. So we will keep supporting young people into work. We will change the system that we inherited, where we had the wrong incentives and a lack of support, and we're putting both of those things to rights.
Well, no surprises there, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister can put new faces on the front bench, but they still don't have the answers. And he criticised the previous Conservative government, but we got unemployment down to a 40-year low, a record Labour could only dream of. They don't want to be held to account, and worse still, he knows it won't work because the country is looking down the barrel of more tax rises in next month's budget, killing yet more jobs and opportunities. Whether it's graduates looking for their first job or older people made redundant, people are crying out for a government that's on their side. So I ask him, what will it take to get the Chancellor to understand that it's businesses that create jobs, not the government? And doesn't he agree that the more she damages the economy, the bigger the welfare bill will get?
Well, Mr Speaker, since we came into office, interest rates have been cut 5 times, helping businesses and households. Business confidence is at a 9-year high, according to Lloyds. We've had announcements of much more private investment, including £150 billion of private investment during the recent state visit. Add to that the trade deals that they couldn't secure, and there are reasons to be optimistic about the future of the economy, and I hope that she shares them.
Mr Logan.
Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, co-chairs the Ministerial Child Poverty Task Force, which is leading our work across government to develop the UK-wide child poverty strategy, which will be published later this year. We are considering all available levers to give every child the best start in life, building on work underway already across all 4 nations. Ahead of publication, the Government has already taken action for the whole of the UK, including introducing a fair repayment rate and improving the adequacy of the standard allowance of universal credit from April 2026. Thank you. I thank the Minister for his answer. The Child Poverty Action Group estimate that because of this government's policies, especially the 2-child cap, every day more than 100 children are dragged into poverty. That equates to almost 3,400 children between now and the autumn statement by the Chancellor at the end of next month. So here's a lever. While child poverty in Scotland is falling, why doesn't the Minister finally listen to reason by scrapping this cruel policy? Why is he waiting? Why does he not just act now? Well, Mr Speaker, this government is acting now. We have already, for families in England, announced that all children will be, in families in receipt of universal credit, will receive free school meals, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty. We have capped the cost of school uniform, introduced a new crisis and resilience fund. Our child maintenance service reforms will lift 20,000 children out of poverty, and there will be much more done when the Child Poverty Task Force reports later this year.
Thank
you, Mr Speaker. The cost of living crisis remains the main issue that people face, despite what the far right try to claim. One way to really help struggling families would be to lift the 2-child benefit cap. That would lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty across the country, including many in my East Leeds constituency. So isn't scrapping the 2-child benefit cap what should be announced in the forthcoming budget?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend will understand that I'm not going to make policy from the dispatch box, but what I would say to him, as I have already said to the previous question, is that all available levers are under consideration as part of our Child Poverty Task Force reporting later this year. We will do what it takes to bear down on child poverty. There are many levers that we can look at to do that. We have pulled some already, and we will continue that work.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Every member in this chamber shares a commitment to lifting people out of poverty, especially children. We just have different views on how to go about it. Children in workless households are nearly 4 times more likely to live in poverty compared to those in households where adults work. We know that work pays. And yet we on these benches find ourselves surrounded by parties just itching to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, resorting to yet another sticking plaster like universal breakfast clubs to reduce uncomfortable figures without putting the hard work in to tackle the causes. So does the Minister share my concern that lifting the 2-child benefit cap will increase worklessness? And can he guarantee that taxes will not go up in next month's budget for adults who work hard and make careful decisions about family size in order to pay for the £3.6 billion it will cost to lift the cap?
Minister.
I have to say, Mr Speaker, I am stunned to hear that the fight that the opposition frontbench chooses to pick on this occasion is opposing universal free breakfast clubs, when we know that well-fed children have hungry minds. It's exactly what she said, for those chirping from a sedentary position. But what I find even more staggering, Mr. Speaker, is the lectures from a front bench opposite that left almost 3 million people in this country economically inactive, around 1 million young people out of work, and they dragged 900,000 children into poverty when the last Labour government lifted 600,000 out. It is the last Labour government that we will be taking lessons from, not the last Tory one.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I note that last year the new Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions said that it's open to debate as to whether the two-child limit is harmful. I note also that this policy is the most impactful of driving children into poverty, with more than 730,000 of them in poverty. Will the Minister acknowledge that the two-child limit is harmful and work with Treasury colleagues to turn this over?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to acknowledge the findings of, I think, the Child Poverty Action Group, who have put forward the statistics that the honourable gentleman has set out. What I would remind him of, as I would remind all members of this House of, is that it is not the only lever available to us. All levers are under active consideration, but I would remind him, as I have reminded other colleagues, of the steps that this government has already taken, including the rollout of universal free school meals, not universal free school meals to all families in receipt of universal credit, which alone will lift 100,000 children out of poverty.
Young.
Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the Skills White Paper we published last week will create more opportunities, and as I said in response to an earlier question, my remit letter to Skills England makes clear the importance of working closely with employers. Employers have told us that they want more flexibility in the apprenticeships levy, and so the Growth and Skills offer is delivering this with more foundation and shorter courses launching next year.
Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a recent round-table meeting in my Thornbury and Yate constituency, small businesses told me the particular challenges that they face in delivering apprenticeships. Given his department is now responsible for this important policy area, what is he doing to reform apprenticeships to make them easier for SMEs to deliver, and what support will he provide so that more can do so?
Well,
Mr. Speaker, we want apprenticeships to be available to employers of all sizes. We have reduced the length of time an apprenticeship needs to take, and I think we can go further in that short course flexibility, which should be of particular help to small and medium-sized employers.
Jessica Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently visited Premier Forest Projects in Newport to learn more about the vocational training and employment opportunities the business is offering to caring experienced young school leavers in Newport, with some wonderful success stories. Can I suggest the department look at the model this company is creating and perhaps say more about how the government is working with businesses to make sure that opportunities like this are more accessible for people from all backgrounds, including those who are care experienced?
Sir Rooster.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to look at the experience of that particular employer, and I enjoyed a recent visit to South Wales, to a different part of South Wales, to open an opportunity hub which is aimed precisely at getting more young people into work, particularly those who've been out of the labour market through long-term sickness issues. And we want to support Wales in doing this. We allocated an extra £10 million to this work over the coming year.
Dame Nayrith.
Question number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Minister will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll take question 12 and 26 and 16 together. I obviously recognise the challenges facing those without inflation protection, particularly after the cost of living pressures of recent years. I think that's shared across this House. I met with a cross-party group of MPs earlier this year to discuss exactly this issue. Mr. Speaker, reforms in the pension schemes bill give trustees more flexibility to share surpluses in their DB pension schemes with employers and to negotiate for members to benefit from any sharing of surplus. And that could include discretionary increases to address the issue my right honourable friend raises.
Mr. Speaker, through the efforts of pension associations, we know that there have been unintended consequences of the 95 pension Pension Act, which made it legal to stop payment of indexation to the pre-97 pensioners of successful multinationals like 3Ms and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, recruited with the promise of indexing pensions, who are now suffering hardship, their pensions already frozen for 15 plus years, despite healthy funds and trustees' pleas. So what will he do to stop this dishonourable practice from continuing, so that these companies deliver the financial security they promised?
Minister.
I absolutely recognise the issue my honourable friend has raised. Any of us in that situation would want to see those increases in those pensions continued. She's aware about the legal background to this, but what I would say is that scheme rules govern when increases with inflation can be paid. Those aren't changed retrospectively, but the pensions regulator has spelt out that trustees should consider those not receiving inflation increases when they're taking their decisions, and they should consider the history of making such awards, and particularly in some of the examples she's just provided. As I say, I think the provisions in the Pension Scheme Bill give trustees more power to argue for those increases.
Margaret.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a constituent. Both she and her husband worked for Hewlett-Packard. They accrued their pension before 1997, and now, along with about 50,000 members of the pre-97 alliance, they're facing real financial hardship. In another 10 years, their pensions will be pretty much worthless. Will the Minister not consider legislating to ensure that these people aren't left in poverty, having been promised a proper pension when they started work for these companies?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the Honourable Lady mentions a particular company, but there are others, and there's particularly a small number of companies generally that are in the situation that we are talking about here. I'm sure that the people running that company, but also on the trustees, will have heard the powerful case made by honourable members on both sides of this House. Those are decisions that have to be taken in line with the scheme rules, but nobody wants to see savers seeing the value of their pension fall over time, and I hope that employers will take the case being made in this chamber seriously.
Maguire. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is unacceptable that 23% of children in Cornwall are living in relative poverty, and we will set out measures to tackle its structural and root causes in our child poverty strategy later this year.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. Child poverty cannot be tackled if children have nowhere safe to live. One of the most shameful legacies of the last Tory government was in Cornwall. It was left with over 700 children living in temporary accommodation, and only 1.4% of homes are now affordable for families on local housing allowance. What assessment has the Minister made of how that shortfall in affordable homes is driving child poverty rates even higher, and what urgent steps will he take to reverse it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman is right to highlight the appalling living standards that some children find themselves living in, and indeed some of the population more broadly. My advice to any Liberal Democrat MP would of course be to stop blocking the homes that we so desperately need, but I would also remind him that this government has invested £39 billion in the delivery of social and affordable homes, because unlike them, we as a party are determined to tackle the housing crisis and to build, baby, build.
This is a Cornish question, Perrin Moon, so others please don't stand. Yeah.
As Mr. Speaker, I represent the most deprived constituency in Cornwall, which is one of the most deprived areas in Northern Europe. Child poverty shot up under the Conservatives. Today, our local FE college, the Ofsted Outstanding Cornwall College, is turning away young learners in construction and engineering due to a lack of space. The college has a solution to expand, but will the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss this issue and help our young people, our amazing young people, break this cycle of deprivation?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sorry to hear of the situation that my honourable friend outlines. What I can say to him is that if the Secretary of State is not able to meet with him, I would be more than happy to do so.
Christian Fowles.
Number 14, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Trailblazers are up and running, delivering support for young people since earlier this year. This includes, for example, mental health support, flexible work experience sessions. We've extended the programme for a further year, bringing total funding to £90 million, and the insights from these trailblazers will inform the national rollout of our youth guarantee.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. But does he agree with me that the actions of this government in supporting young people are in stark contrast to the situation in Scotland, where we've had 18 years of SNP neglect, with the college sector suffering a 20% cut in the last 5 years? And does he agree with me that as the energy sector in Scotland transitions to greener forms of energy production, that the jobs and the skills that are needed to bolster that particular industry could be taught at these colleges, and that we risk having a double whammy of young people not being able to take on these important jobs, lecturers being paid off, and our colleges being in dire financial states?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. She's absolutely right to draw attention to the importance of the energy transition, and as I said, the Scottish Government is receiving the largest spending review settlement in real terms since devolution was established. We know that young people in Scotland have the talent, but is their government backing them by giving them the opportunity? We believe a proportion of those funds should be devoted to that. I'm pleased to say that, for example, BAE Systems will be a major beneficiary of the £10 billion deal to build Type 26 frigates for Norway, a critical investment in European security, and one that I hope the Scottish Government has got round to supporting.
Jim Sharp.
Mr Speaker, can I welcome the Secretary of State to his place, wish him well in the new role he plays, and I'm quite confident that he'll give us all the answers we wish to have. And just to prove that, Northern Ireland continues to have a higher proportion of youth, those not in employment, education or training, some 11 to 13% compared to the UK average. So can I ask the Secretary of State this question? What discussions has the Minister had with the relevant Minister in Northern Ireland to ensure that the opportunities and provide the necessary support to young people in Northern Ireland? Thanks so much.
Well, Mr Speaker, there should be no part of the United Kingdom where we do not give young people the maximum opportunity. I had a good working relationship with the Northern Ireland Executive in my last post, and I hope to have a good working relationship with them in this post for the shared agenda of giving our young people the best possible chance in life.
Question 15, Mr Speaker.
Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Work coaches are required to tailor work-related requirements to claimants' capabilities and their circumstances, and they can pause them if that is appropriate.
Mr Speaker, my constituent Ross has neurodiversities, and he is in employment working at a garden centre, but his income is supplemented by universal credit. On inadvertently missing an appointment with a job coach over the phone, he was sanctioned, losing out on 2 months' worth of rent and risked being made homeless and losing his job if he didn't have his parents to step in. Can the Minister assure folks like Ross that they will be powered up by our benefit system and not punished when they make innocent mistakes?
Minister?
Well, we certainly do want the system to support people like Ross. If work-related requirements are missed, then the reason that's happened should be asked for, and 7 days allowed for an answer. And there should also be a pre-referral check before a sanction referral takes place. If he'd like to send me the details of what happened in that particular case, I'll happily look into it.
We now come to Topicals. Catherine Fuchs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Second time lucky. Question number 1, please.
Mr Speaker, I'm very conscious of the responsibilities of the Department, which touches millions of lives in this country every month. We've joined up skills and employment support in the Department of Work and Pensions to bring the skills system closer to the labour market. And as part of our youth guarantee, we've announced that it will have a backstop jobs guarantee in it. Together with that and Connect to Work, we are both tackling the incentives in the system and providing critical support, because my priority is to have a welfare state which looks after people when times are tough, but also provides a platform of opportunity to help get them out of welfare and into work.
from Fuchs.
At the Conservative Party conference, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury called for the state pension to be means tested. This has caused deep concern in Monmouthshire to pensioners there who've worked hard all their lives and built up modest savings. Under the party opposite's plans, they would risk losing their state pension. Will the Secretary of State confirm that under this Labour government, the state pension will remain available to all?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that what she referred to about means testing is not the government's policy, but can the party opposite confirm whether it's theirs? The Chief Secretary let the cat out of the bag. Can she confirm that this is not her policy, or is it that her leader still sticks to the position she said earlier this year, where she said, we are going to look at means testing? Are they still looking at it, or are they not?
The good thing is the government's not responsible for their own problems. Helen Waiters, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, questions are to be answered by the government on this occasion. The Right Honourable Gentleman has an important and not always easy job. I'm sure we all remember the fiasco before the summer when the government tried to make welfare savings and ended up legislating for welfare spending. Since then, the Prime Minister has said that there is a clear moral case for welfare cuts, and the Chancellor has said that she can't leave welfare untouched. Does the Secretary of State agree?
Mr. Speaker, I noticed she didn't want to clarify the position on means testing the state pension. Welfare reform is happening all the time. We passed important changes to the universal credit system, which were voted through by the House. And as I said, we are putting in place important employment support to help not only the long-term sick and disabled people into work, but also young people through many of the policies that I've talked about today.
I can't help but notice that the Secretary of State continues to attempt to deflect from his job of answering the questions. And the fact is, we just heard he won't commit to making the welfare savings that his Prime Minister and his Chancellor has said they need to make. I thought the Prime Minister was meant to be in charge. Getting people off welfare and into work not only saves money, it's morally wrong to condemn people to a life on benefits. Without welfare reform, this country is stuck on Labour's broken record of higher taxes and lower growth. We have even offered to help him. So why won't the Secretary of State commit to making welfare savings?
Mr. Speaker, we inherited a position which had 3 million people inactive and almost 1 million people not in employment, education or training. We are putting in place critical employment support to help long-term sick and disabled people into work. We have changed the incentives through legislation on the universal credit system, and we are increasing the face-to-face checks in the system, which fell under their watch. What do people think it fell by? Do we think it fell by 10%? Do we think it fell by 30%? It fell by 90% under the system over which her government presided.
Peter Lamb.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many other honourable members have today outlined the proven track record of access to work in enabling constituents, disabled constituents, to access employment, in addition to the challenges posed by the current shortfall in funding. Can the Minister reassure the House that of the £1 billion worth of additional employment support funding that has been announced this year, the proper funding for access to work remains one of the potential avenues for that funding?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, demand for access to work has risen sharply. I mentioned earlier that spending went up by 17% in the last year, but I don't think access to work can replace a well-designed support programme. That's what we're determined to put in place, and the Department's new independent disability advisory panel will help us work out the best approaches to employment support.
Steve Darling, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the government have made a promise that those transferring from legacy benefits to universal credit would find themselves no worse off. And yet, Liberal Democrat colleagues from all over the country are finding people worse off. Will the Secretary of State give what evidence that they have of how they are supporting those most vulnerable where they are finding themselves worse off? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is transitional protection available for people making the transition across. And I spoke earlier about the support being provided through the enhanced support journey to people for whom the transition may be particularly difficult. And I'm thinking, for example, about some people on employment and support allowance. If there are particular cases that he's worried about, if he'd like to send me details, I'll very happily look into those.
Speaker, for too long, too many people in the North East have been left behind due to stubbornly high unemployment. Now, the Inactivity Trailblazer offers an opportunity to tackle the often complex reasons that sit behind this. Can the Minister set out how this will work alongside existing programmes like the New Deal for North East workers to support people into fulfilling productive employment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. People shouldn't be denied the opportunity to work. That is why the Department has backed the Inactivity Trailblazer in the North East with £10 million this year and a further £10 million next year. Is testing new ways to help people overcome barriers to work. We are determined to turn around the situation that we inherited from the party opposite, and we are working closely with the excellent Mayor for the North East to bring these policies together.
Sarah Dyke.
Speaker, only 30% of people with autism are in work, compared with nearly 55% of disabled people. Charlie, who's celebrating his 31st birthday on Saturday, lives in Boltonsborough with his parents, but like many young adults with autism, he's struggled to find employment. His mother, Jenny, told me yesterday that Charlie is a classic example of wasted talent. So what steps is the Minister taking to ensure adults with autism and other SEN can find fulfilling and secure employment?
The member raises a very important point, and I agree with her about the importance of not wasting talent in the future. That's the reason for the reforms that we're introducing. We set up earlier this year an expert panel to advise us on how best to support people with neurodivergence into employment, building actually on the work of Sir Robert Buckland and his review of autism employment in the last Parliament. We have now received that advice from the expert panel, and we're looking now at how to take that work forward.
Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I still have parents in Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme coming to me because they're not getting the money their children need. One constituent reports her ex repeatedly self-declaring employment until the CMS catches up, switches onto benefits for a few months, drops to £7 a week, and then returns to self-employment to restart that cycle. Online forums, openly trade tips to avoid child maintenance. What will the Minister do to try to close these loopholes and make sure every child gets the support they need?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my honourable friend for his question? The government plans to consult on changes to the calculation that will capture more income types automatically within that calculation. And where parents willfully avoid their financial obligations, the CMS Financial Investigation Unit does have the powers to act and will investigate. Child maintenance is key to keeping children out of poverty, and we will use these powers wherever necessary.
Ellen Morgan.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent's 25-year-old son unfortunately lost his leg in a motorcycle accident and it was amputated above the knee, but he was awarded PIP and a specially adapted car and has been able to rebuild his life. In August this year, he was contacted to say that the PIP and the adapted car would be withdrawn from him. He's clearly and sadly not going to get any better. How can we be in a situation where people whose condition is permanent are having their support withdrawn?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd be very happy to look into the particular case the honourable member raises. Of course, there is an appeal available, and I'd hope that her constituent will have submitted an appeal, but if she lets me have the details, I'll gladly have a look.
Joel Powell.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month I visited the SPEAR programme in North Kensington, who are doing fantastic work supporting young people back into employment through programmes which the DWP Data Lab have found to have a significant impact. Could the Minister outline how evidence produced by units like the Data Lab will help guide the Trailblazer funding to get young people back into work?
Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SPEAR programme was one of the first organisations to go through an evaluation with the Data Lab a few years ago. I'm pleased to tell him the findings from that were really positive, and I'm delighted that his constituency is located in one of the youth trailblazer areas, because as we've reiterated several times during this session, it is crucial to do everything we can to help young people into work and address the issue of people not in employment, education or training that we inherited.
Liz Jarvis.
Mr. Speaker, many young care leavers living in supported housing want to increase their hours at work but find themselves caught in the benefits trap. And YMCA Eastleigh tells me this is impacting care leavers in my constituency. What recent discussions has the Minister had with Cabinet colleagues on reforms to the tax and benefit system to make work pay for young care leavers?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is a problem in the interaction between housing benefit, which provides housing support for people in supported accommodation, and housing support in the universal credit system. That interaction does cause difficulties, and I think that's what she's referring to. We are looking at that at the moment. I'm talking to other parts of government about it, and working with people like the YMCA and Centrepoint to look at the problem, what we can do to fix it.
McNally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents in Coatbridge and Bellsill are experiencing delays in migrating to universal credit due to years of Tory mismanagement over our welfare system. This is a stressful time for claimants and a very busy time for the department. So can my right honourable friend outline what steps the department is taking to make sure it is fully resourced so that these delays are processed and those claims the time for those claims is reduced?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department is prioritising making sure that there is adequate staffing resource available to support claimants and ensure migration is delivered smoothly and on time. But I am concerned to hear what he says about the experience of his own constituents in Coatbridge and Bellsill, and I will look further into this on his behalf and revert back to him.
George.
The Trussell Trust recently reported that 3 in 10 people referred to food banks in 2024 were in working households, and that the majority of those, 72%, were on universal credit. What more can the government do to ensure that work pays and that we can take low-paid workers out of poverty?
Mr. Speaker, I recently spoke at an event hosted by this organisation in Parliament. I was pleased to say that in their report they said there had been a small drop in the use of food banks over the past year. We have put the Household Support Fund on a proper basis, now the Crisis and Resilience Fund, for the next 3 years to support those families in the most desperate need.
Mr. Speaker, giving sick and disabled people agency and drawing on lived experience sets the only path to getting policy right so that they can access work, appointments and get out of their homes, avoiding worklessness, health decline and isolation, with their mobility support needs recognised through PIP. Further to his previous answer, will the Minister ensure that any policy reforms to the PIP mobility payments will be fully co-produced with sick and disabled people?
Minister.
Well, I can reassure my honourable friend that the review of the PIP assessment, including the mobility element of that benefit, will be undertaken fully in co-production with disabled people and disabled people's organisations, and I'll be setting out very shortly how the review that I'm going to be leading will be undertaken.
John Mayo.
Businesses crying out, Mr. Speaker, that the Employment Rights Bill is going to cost jobs. Now the Tony Blair Institute, the spiritual home of the Secretary of State, says it will cripple the jobs market, especially for young people, and it's not a laughing matter. So what is the Secretary of State's view? Will the Employment Rights Bill help his department to increase employment, or will it cost even more jobs?
So state.
Mr. Speaker, it should be no surprise that the Labour Party supports better rights at work for people. History is replete with warnings that better employment rights would result in fewer jobs. These were the warnings that the party opposite gave when we introduced the national minimum wage many years ago. Of course, it is important that when legislating on these issues, we do it closely in consultation with employers, and that is precisely what we intend to do.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 47% of children in my Liverpool Riverside constituency live in poverty. The Minister has mentioned that he will consider all levers. Does that include speaking with the Treasury to look at a wealth tax to bring in much needed money into the Treasury to remove the two-child cap?
Mr Speaker, as we've discussed a number of times, of course we want to reduce child poverty. She will not be surprised to hear that when it comes to tax, this is a matter for the Chancellor and not for me.
Imam Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I welcome the Secretary of State to his place and wish him well. Last week I attended a WASPI campaign drop-in and was informed that there are currently 4,320 women in Dewsbury and Backley affected by the WASPI scandal. This was previously higher, but many have already passed away without justice. On the 27th of July, I wrote to the former Secretary of State regarding her support for WASPI campaign after being contacted by over 40 of my constituents, but I have yet to receive a response. With the government still refusing to engage in civil mediation to deliver justice to the WASPI women, will the new Secretary of State reconsider meeting campaigners to find a just way forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The previous Minister for Pensions met with representatives of the WASPI campaign. She did so to hear from their experiences directly and was the first Minister to do so in 8 years. I will look into the details of the letter he mentions.
Total crime.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to welcome the Secretary of State to his office and thank the Under-Secretary of State for our visit to the DWP Debt and Fraud Centre in Minor Hill in your constituency recently. 95 jobs there, doing a tremendous work across the UK, proving that civil service job dispersal does work. Isn't this a template for other government departments and an example to the Scottish Government, SNP Scottish Government, which has dispersed no jobs, no power and no funds from Edinburgh?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I endorse everything that my honourable friend has said. I did have a fantastic visit to what is a very beautiful constituency that he is fortunate enough to represent, and it showed exactly what can happen through our Places for Growth initiative that looks to relocate jobs out of London and into places such as Stornoway.
Rachel Gilmore.
Mr Speaker, in my constituency of Tiverton and Minehead, I've met with many pensionable-age constituents, most of them who live on the Duck estate, who've lost entitlement to pension credit by as little as 50p. Would the Honourable Minister agree with me that the pension credit, ESA and PIP systems could all do with more common sense and a little less of a computer says no mentality?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I think in general, lots of life could do with less computer says no, so on that basis we all agree. On the specifics of the question she raises about pension credit, the nature of the system is obviously that it's providing a guaranteed level of income. It's not setting out an entitlement like universal credit. So there does have to be a limit somewhere, and I'm afraid that does mean that some people will always be on one side of it. But what you don't want to see in a system is too many things in that winner-takes-all perspective. But I take the point she raises.
Lee Ingham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recently visited Drake Hall Women's Prison in my constituency of Stafford, Eccleshall and the Villages, and they have a brilliant initiative there, a Holford's Training Centre, to support people into employment once they leave the prison estate. They support people all over the country, not just in my constituency, and I'm interested to find out whether the Secretary of State could let me know what conversations are happening with the Ministry of Justice around schemes like this, supporting or expanding them.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank you for a question. It sounds like an excellent initiative, and of course it is important, if we are to rehabilitate prisoners, that they get training and the chance to get into constructive employment after their sentence. I'm sure that applies not just to the prison in her constituency, but throughout the country.
Ambassador Jecti.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Alan Marnes is a constituent of mine in Southbow who has staunchly campaigned since 2002 on the issue of the lack of indexation for pre-1997 pension rights, having been one of the 140,000 people who lost their occupational pension. I wrote to the Secretary of State asking whether the newly revived Pensions Commission will address the issue of failed pension funds more than 2 months ago and have still not received a response. So would the Secretary of State agree to meet with me and Alan to provide some much-needed clarity on such a long-standing issue?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not absolutely clear whether the particular case that the honourable member is raising relates to people within the PPF and the FAS, or is relating to a pre-97 indexation within a solvent pension scheme. But if you'd like to write with me to the details, I'll absolutely make sure that I come back to it.
Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 in 3 children in my constituency are growing up in poverty. With the budget approaching, what discussions has he had with the Chancellor of the Exchequer about scrapping the 2-child limit, a policy widely recognised as one of the biggest drivers of child poverty in Britain today?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already taken action to reduce child poverty, extending free school meals to all families on universal credit. Of course, we will explore other avenues to do this. We want to reduce child poverty in stark contrast to the record of the party opposite.
So, Oliver Dalden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When my constituents move into new social housing, they find it stripped of perfectly good white goods, curtains, carpets and so on. What can the government do to address this? Because it's driving my constituents further into poverty and benefit dependency. It's also environmentally destructive. Surely there's a way through this, and can I call on him to work with others across government to address it?
Minister. The right honourable gentleman raises an important issue. It is something that might perhaps be better discussed at MHCLG questions, but as he asks us to pick this up cross departments, I would be very happy to do so. What I would say to him is that the Crisis and Resilience Fund, formerly the Household Support Fund, is in place to support people setting up in new homes, as are indeed grants that are available from housing associations directly.
That completes questions. Let the front bench do. Point of orders come after. Don't worry. Just empty accused. See you later. Right, we now come to the urgent question. Secretary of State Andrew Barr.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero if he will make a statement on the future of the North Sea oil and gas industry.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The North Sea will be at the heart of Britain's energy future. For decades, its workers, businesses and communities have helped power our country and our world, and they will do so for decades to come. The oil and gas industry has lost around a third of its entire workforce in the last decade, as oil and gas production has declined. A plan is now needed, and that's why in March we consulted on a framework for building a world-leading offshore clean energy industry in the North Sea, alongside managing existing oil and gas fields for their lifespan. We will respond to that consultation in the coming weeks. And alongside that, we published our Clean Energy Jobs Plan, which sets out over 400,000 more good jobs to be created across the UK, including 40,000 in Scotland by the end of the decade, facilitated thanks to record investments in clean energy and the certainty that our plans have created to see over £50 billion worth of private investment since July 2024. Now, turning, Mr. Speaker, to today's news. Colleagues in the House will be aware that Petrofac Limited have for some time been working on a restructure relating to their global portfolio. This restructuring plan failed following the unexpected termination of a contract by Tenant, a Dutch transmission company. And at 7 a.m. today, holding company Petrofac Limited announced that it will be entering administration. Now, while obviously disappointing for the company, this is the product of long-standing issues with their global business. Contrary to misleading reports today, the UK arm of Petrofac has not entered administration and is continuing to operate as normal, as an in-demand business with a highly skilled workforce and many successful contracts. Indeed, only last month, Petrofac's UK arm extended 2 significant contracts, demonstrating this business has a viable future. The announcement today only covers the top-level holding company, Petrofac Limited, which has no employees. The Petrofac Group has faced long-standing challenges, including a high-profile £77 million financial penalty imposed in 2021 following a serious Fraud Office investigation into bribery. Now, we understand that there is reason to be optimistic about a commercial resolution, including the UK arm, and the Government has been and will remain in close contact with the company, and I repeat this to the House. The UK business has not entered administration. It is successful and growing, and it will continue to operate as normal.
Andrew Bow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another week, yet another hammer blow to our North Sea oil and gas industry, another gut punch to energy workers, another blow to our energy security. And, Mr. Speaker, the blame, whatever the Minister says today, lies squarely with this Labour government. Today, the energy giant, they don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker, but today, the energy giant Petrofac has entered administration, casting doubt over the future of their 2,000 employees in Scotland, as their global HQ is in Aberdeen, and countless more supported indirectly through the supply chain. This is a company that, as the Minister has said, has had issues for many years. But the hostile environment created by this government in the UK continental shelf has made operating here for far too many companies nigh on impossible. Since the 2024 general election, there have been thousands of redundancies in our offshore energy industry. Harbour Energy completed a new round of redundancies just last month. With depressing regularity, Mr. Speaker, we hear of more job losses in the North Sea. Whether that be at Harbour Energy, Apache, Hunting or Petrofac, each job lost means uncertainty for a family, a mortgage jeopardised, investment fleeing our communities, and our world-class supply chains and skilled workforce pushed towards extinction. Minister, how many more of these will it take for the Secretary of State for Energy to change course? These are political choices. This is a manufactured decline. As a direct result of the hostile trading environment, the close for business sign is hanging over the UK continental shelf. From the energy profits levy extension and increase to the ban on new licences to the refusal to defend the government's decision on Rosebank and Jackdaw, the odds are being stacked against the North Sea industry, damaging the business environment, threatening investment, harming our economy and undermining our energy security. These are political choices that have resulted in job losses. So can I ask the Minister, what steps are being taken to support Petrofac's HQ employees in Aberdeen? How many more jobs have to be lost across the industry for this government to change course? When will the thousands of jobs promised through GB Energy for Aberdeen and around the United Kingdom materialise? And will he personally act and ask his boss, the Secretary of State for Energy, to change course? Or is he content to sacrifice Aberdeen, the North East and our energy industry on this vainglorious campaign to destroy our fossil fuel industry?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I say to the honourable gentleman that on the issue of Petrofac, I just say that he should be careful with his tone. To come here and try to undermine efforts to find a buyer for the UK arm, to talk down a successful business, which I've just outlined is a successful and growing business in the North Sea, is deeply irresponsible. There have been long-standing issues at this company, and as a former minister in Desnes, he of all people should know of these long-standing issues, and he'll be well aware of that given his previous role. We all have a responsibility here across the House to support this company at the moment, not to undermine it, and to send a positive message to those workers, the suppliers and the customers that the UK arm is continuing to operate as normal. All the signs are that there is a viable long-term future for this company, but not if we have comments like the honourable gentleman has put forward today undermining that business. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the wider question of the North Sea, he knows as well as anyone, or he should know, that under his parties in government, we lost over a third of the jobs in the North Sea. He wants to pretend that this transition arrived in July 2024, but he was in government. He was in government when these jobs were going, and they failed time and time and time again to come up with any credible plan for how they manage the future of the North Sea. We will not do that. We will come up with a plan, and that's why we're building the industries of the future on hydrogen, on carbon capture, on offshore wind, on the supply chains, the very investments that he and his honourable friends on that side turn their back against time and time again. They're turning their backs on the future of the energy story in the North Sea, more interested in exploiting problems than actually solving them. And time again, they have learned no lessons from their time in government when they left these workers without a credible plan. We will not do the same again.
Patricia first.
Mr. Speaker, and I wonder if my honourable friend can outline to the House how this government is delivering the Clean Energy Jobs Plan, which will see 40,000 new jobs in the clean energy industries in Scotland by 2030. A very welcome move, and I'm sure one that will be welcomed around the Chamber. But can he also advise what support will be given to that plan by the Scottish Government?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point about building up the industries of the future. Look, I've said on a number of occasions we should rightly be proud of 6 decades of oil and gas in the north east of Scotland. We should be proud of the work that that workforce has achieved, but we should also recognise that we have been in transition now for a long time, and building up the jobs of the future in carbon capture, in hydrogen, in offshore wind, in supply chains. These are how we make sure that there's a long-term, viable, sustainable future in the north east, alongside oil and gas for many decades to come. The work that the Scottish Government needs to do in this space is particularly around improving the skills offer so that there are more of Scotland's young people who can take up the 40,000 jobs that we'll create over the coming years. That's a huge opportunity for Scotland's young people, but only if we improve the system of education we have in Scotland.
Pippa Herling, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is worrying news. Petrofac is one of the North Sea's largest offshore contractors, but after years of financial difficulty is entering administration today. Whilst I cannot share the Honourable Member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardin's desire to ditch the Climate Change Act, I do share his concern for these 2,000 jobs in Scotland and those workers who face uncertainty about their future. So the Secretary of State must act swiftly to find a sustainable path forward, hopefully secure a buyer and safeguard these skilled jobs. And this underlines why the Liberal Democrats have called for an independent Just Transition Commission, putting oil and gas workers and local communities front and centre. And it was good to see the much-awaited publication of the Government's Clean Energy Jobs Plan last week. However, we do know job creation is not happening fast enough to keep up with job losses in the North Sea. So can the Secretary of State and the Minister confirm what will be done to fill that gap in the meantime, in the short term, and deliver a genuinely just transition that keeps these skilled workers powering Britain's clean energy future?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, can I just say, first of all, what a contrast it is with someone responding to this concerning issue, as she rightly says, in a serious way and not talking down the industry. And I think this is actually where this House should stand taller and recognise that this is a company that's doing good work, that there are workers right now, 2,000 of them, out in the North Sea carrying out their duties. We want to make sure that that is a viable future for the company, and we're doing everything that we can in that space. And all the signs are that it is a growing, successful business. We should recognise that and talk it up, not talk it down, as the Conservative Party seem hell-bent on doing. Can I just say on her wider point, she's right to say that, of course, the future of clean energy jobs is tens of thousands across Scotland and hundreds of thousands across the UK, but that we need to ramp those jobs up as quickly as possible and make sure that people can achieve those jobs. We're doing what we can around looking at the skills framework in place, but also making sure that through investments we're making Great British Energy, those jobs come forward much faster, and that people are supported to move from jobs in oil and gas into those jobs where we know there's a real correlation in skills in the future. We're picking this work up after a failure of the previous government to have any plan. We're moving as fast as we can, and we'll say more on that North Sea plan in the coming weeks.
Dr. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say this is a very underpowered, urgent question, a bit similar to a two-stroke engine that we're attached to our rowing boat.
One of us is going to sit down. It's going to be me. When I decide on urgent question, I don't need to be questioned about how urgent, whether it's two-stroke or a 50cc. Actually, some of us actually think it might be 3 litre.
Of course, referring to the opposition, the shadow minister, who knows full well that he has missed the story here. Petrofac went into administration because the Dutch government cut a contract for offshore wind farm developments, and I dare say that raises concerns about the viability, the finance and supply chain for the offshore wind farm industry. But Petrofac, as the shadow minister well knows, as the minister has pointed out, is successful in the UK, has 2,000 jobs in the UK, has contracts in the UK. So we need less scaremongering from this underpowered opposition and more assurance from the Minister that he will look after these jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just reflect on something my honourable friend said, that look, this is a global company. It has not had its troubles to seek for some time. It was subject to an investigation back in 2017. It has gone through a number of restructuring routes since then. Ultimately, that process came to an end when they lost a significant contract from Tenet, one of the Dutch transmission owners. So this is a company that has faced global headwinds for some time. But the UK business, and I'll repeat this to the House again and again, the UK business has a viable long-term future. It is already growing. It is successful. And we have a responsibility, I think, across this House to talk up British businesses, to talk up the workers in those jobs at the moment, not to talk them down.
Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I convey in the strongest possible terms to the Junior Minister the anger and anxiety that is felt by my constituents in Aberdeen, because right now they are providing energy security to each and every one of us on these aisles. They are providing revenue to his treasury, and yet the only reward, the only certainty that they seem to have on this government's watch is that of looming job losses. So may I ask, and he shakes his head, may I ask him to come to Aberdeen and explain to my constituents, when he is going to listen to trade unions, to academics, to the workers and to industry, and protect that industry going forward for our energy security, but also for Scotland's economy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm in Aberdeen regularly and do meet his constituents who are working right now in renewables and carbon capture and hydrogen jobs, as well as his constituents who work in oil and gas, his constituents who benefit from investments that Great British Energy will make, for example, which he failed to vote for, and who also tell me that after a long period of time of having no credible plan on the... He can shout me down all he wants. He can shout me down all he wants. He asked a question.
I'm just going to say to the honourable member, I brought you in early because I thought it was right to your constituents and you'd applied for a UQ. But I do expect a little respect, even if you don't like the answer, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He asks a serious question, and I'm trying to give him an answer if he would but listen for a few moments. We do take seriously the issue of job losses. Of course we do, and I do take them very seriously. But what we have to recognise is that there have been 70,000 jobs lost over the past 10 years without a credible plan on the future of the North Sea. We're going to deliver that. We're delivering new jobs in the energy future alongside that. But I would also just say to him, I'm somewhat confused what the SNP's policy is on this, because as far as I understood it, it is exactly the same policy as this government has, which is to look at the licensing position. Now, if he's telling us now that the SNP's position has changed, then that's news to me and I suspect to the House. But of course, they haven't published the draft energy strategy. It's been in draft form for 2 years, so it's hard for anyone to know.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure that the UK arm of the company, which is an in-demand business with a highly skilled workforce and many successful contracts, has a long-term future in the UK, particularly in the context of our Clean Energy Jobs Plan announced earlier last week, and indeed, as my right honourable friend from the Western Isles pointed out, some of the risks around the development of offshore wind in Holland?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. Look, we have obviously been liaising with the company over quite a long period of time on the restructuring, and indeed the previous government did as well. We've been looking at this issue. We'll continue to work very closely with them to make sure that there is a viable long-term future for the UK part, but it's an in-demand business. As I say, just last month they expanded some of their contracts, which shows that they are successful, and of course they have a highly skilled workforce working in a huge range of jobs right across oil and gas. The wider question about investment into renewables is also one that we should take seriously, which is we have a huge opportunity in the United Kingdom to capitalise on the economic opportunities that come from offshore wind, from onshore wind, from hydrogen and carbon capture, but it requires consistency and a view that the UK is a safe place to invest, things that are put at threat by the party opposite.
John Long. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who has met businesses in Aberdeen will know that they rely on the oil and gas sector. This net zero at all costs policy by this Labour government is a disaster for high quality skills and jobs in the North East and across Scotland. So what urgent action will the government take to restore confidence and stability in the energy sector?
Well, I reject his assertion that this government is somehow following a course without looking at the evidence. Clearly, oil and gas is a crucial part of our energy mix and will be for decades to come. We've been really clear on that. But so too is building up what comes next. And that does mean investing in the supply chains that so often were not part of building the infrastructure that we have in our waters. We towed things in and switched them on and had none of the jobs that went with it. We're determined to change that. But that comes with having a credible industrial strategy, and it also comes with a long-term plan for the future of the North Sea, something that we didn't have under 14 years of the previous government.
Incredibly, Mr. Speaker, it's now 8 months since the Prime Minister announced £200 million from the National Well Fund for the industrial future of Grangemouth. I've had meetings with numerous companies that have proposals and are frankly impatient to get started. When will this money be spent? When will these jobs come to my town? Because all there is to show far is the bones of an unjust transition and industrial devastation.
Well, we absolutely have been looking at a number of proposals. I met 5 companies who are the front runners for investment from the National Wealth Fund, along with the Scottish Government Minister for Energy. There are a number of those propositions that are being taken forward, and I hope we will have an announcement to make in due course. But of course, what we've been trying to do here is not just spend £200 million on the first thing that comes along, but to find the genuinely long-term viable industrial opportunities that deliver jobs at Grangemouth, not just for a year or 2 years, but long into the future. Because the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to say that for far too long that site has been victim from a lack of planning, and it is an example of a just transition done wrongly. We want to make that different by having a serious plan for long-term jobs on that site. The NWF has brought companies to the table and will deliver an announcement on that in due course.
Christine Jardine.
Mr. Speaker, while I accept the Minister's comments about Petrofac, it is a very worrying day for not just the 2,000 workers whose jobs are at stake, but for the entire North East economy in Scotland, for the oil economy. And there are 2 things which are missing, which we desperately need in Scotland. And one is investment in jobs and the skills that we will need for those renewable industries that the Minister talks about. And the other is a reform of the taxation system, of the windfall tax, to make sure it's consistent and that we have consistency in the North Sea. So can the Minister tell us what this government is going to do about those things?
Well, can I thank the honourable lady? She's right, of course, that any announcements like this are worrying for those directly involved, but obviously for the wider community, and I entirely recognise that point. She's right to say that investing in the jobs of the future is critical. We've worked with the Scottish Government, because we do work with the Scottish Government, to deliver joint funding for transition support so that workers can get the direct skills support they need to move from an oil and gas job into a renewables job. That's really important. But we do need to see much more in upskilling the next generation who can take advantage of the jobs that we'll create in the clean energies of the future. On the question of taxation, I'm afraid that's a matter for the Chancellor.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My own constituency in Dunfermline Dollar has SMEs and large businesses working in renewables, working in oil and gas, solar, onshore wind and offshore wind. Does the Minister agree with me that some of the outbursts today we've seen from the opposite sides, from both the Conservatives and the SNP, will do nothing but undermine confidence that those companies face? And furthermore, can he please reassure me that he is working extensively with colleges in Scotland and with employers to make sure that we do see that transition from skills from oil and gas into renewables, so that people in my constituency can take full opportunities of the investments this government is making?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that there are huge opportunities coming. And look, when I say we should be proud of the history of oil and gas, we should also be really proud of what that industry is doing to transition into the future. We need to do much more to make sure those jobs are delivered now, but certainty and confidence that the plan isn't going to change overnight is critical for how we get private sector investment into the UK to deliver on these jobs. It's also why it's so important we look at skills in the round. And look, I do have to say, despite outbursts today, the SNP in Holyrood and this UK government are working closely on making sure those skills opportunities are delivered. Would I like that to go further? Of course I would like that to go further. I hope we'll have a change of government and can make that happen. But this only works if we have a serious approach to recognising the challenges and building the jobs of the future and making sure people can take advantage of those opportunities right across Scotland.
Speaker, we urgently need to restore confidence and stability in our oil and gas sector, or we'll be here again and again as more and more businesses suffer and more jobs are lost, whether that's in my Gordon and Buchan constituency, across North East Scotland, Scotland as a whole, or the UK as a whole. There are oil and gas and energy jobs everywhere in the UK. The future of Petrofac's 2,000 skilled and expertise staff, but also the indirect jobs that rely on them, are now at risk, and are at risk based on the Petrofac being able to find a buyer for its North Sea assets. Does the Minister think that the job of finding a buyer has been made more or less likely, given what the government has created, in the industry words, being the most unstable fiscal environment in the world?
I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I have enormous respect for the Honourable Lady, but this is not the day to be talking down this particular company. Now, she can make the wider points about this government's policy, and I totally recognise that, but this is a hugely important moment not to undermine a successful and growing company, to make sure that the suppliers and companies and customers of Petrofac continue to support that business, because it is operating, as of today, as normal. And I think it is incumbent on all of us to make sure that that continues to be the case. We are obviously making sure that we're working closely with the company to make sure that outcome is delivered, because she's right to say about the wider impact. But those 2,000 jobs have continued as normal today. The supply chain jobs that rely on those 2,000 jobs have continued as normal today. And any suggestion to the contrary is just not correct.
Christine Sullivan.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that it is important to speak responsibly, with care and accuracy, around the successful UK arm of Petrofac, because to do otherwise will only serve to undermine the business and job security that we all want to see across this House? And what steps is he taking to ensure it has a long-term future in the UK?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. And look, of course, I come to this House and rightly expect to be challenged on this government's policies, and a back and forward that is as strong as we have had is important. But I think in this one instance on this company, separate from any view that members might have on the wider policies of this government, it is important that we come together where we can and say this is a strong, successful, growing company. It is in all of our interests right across this House to talk up the importance of this company continuing to be successful, so that a buyer is found or another commercial resolution is found, so that those jobs can be maintained. That's surely in all of our interests.
Kirsty Blackman.
Every single one of us has been criticising government policy, not criticising Petrofac, not criticising the expertise and the workers at Petrofac, not criticising any of the workers that are working in our oil and gas industry. The Minister says that he's been spending time in Aberdeen. Does he have any idea how it feels to be in Aberdeen just now? Does he have any idea how this is just another hammer blow that is coming? And it is because of the government's policies. It is because of the fact that there is this massive gap. Skilled workers in the oil and gas industry will just go abroad. They will go away elsewhere. It does not matter whether or not we retrain them. The jobs are not there for them right now. What is he going to do to plug this gap? What is he going to do to keep these skilled workers in Scotland, in Aberdeen, in these islands, and not drive them away?
Well, look, I take her first point with a pinch of salt after her second point, where she said that this comes as a hammer blow to the community. There is no hammer blow. Those jobs have been protected. And there are 2,000 workers today waking up doing the same job as they were doing last week. So I take a bit of a pinch of salt with that point. She's right, of course, to say, look, I am in Aberdeen. I don't pretend she's an Aberdeen MP. Of course, she hears from her constituents much more than I am when I'm there. But I've made an effort to be there as often as possible to hear the concerns, but also to recognise that that is exactly why we need to move further and faster than we have done for the past 14 years of the previous government, 18 years of the Scottish Government, to put a credible plan in place for the future of those jobs. That does mean investing in future jobs, but also making sure that the processes are in place so people can take advantage of those jobs much more easily. Passporting, something which was stuck in the mud for years, is now being delivered because we helped to unlock it. Now, there's a lot more to do, and we'll say that in the coming weeks when we publish our Future of the North Sea plan, but we are the ones driving forward investment that creates the jobs of the future, and I'm afraid other parties, and I didn't until today count her party as one of those, are harking back to the past rather than recognising the jobs of the future need to go hand in hand with good, well-paid oil and gas jobs in the short term.
Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and the confidence he is showing in these workers, absolutely. We've heard from the SNP, the difference between Labour and SNP just now is that SNP do want to scrap the energy profits levy, but they don't know what they're going to replace it with. They just want to replace it with something that's fairer. Does he agree that, does he think this is the kind of leadership we need in the oil and gas sector?
Well, I say to my honourable friend, we recognise that the energy profits levy will come to an end. We've consulted on what the future of that looks like with industry. It's a matter for the Chancellor to obviously outline tax policy as it is standard practice in this House. It's not for me to say that. But I would say, look, there is a broader question here about how we make sure we're driving forward investment, and talking down the investment in carbon capture, hydrogen, offshore wind and the supply chains is not the way to drive forward the jobs of the future alongside these critical, important oil and gas jobs that will be with us for decades to come.
Sir Bernard Jim.
Mr Speaker, can I ask the Minister why does he refuse to issue new licences for the exploitation of new gas fields and new oil fields in the North Sea? Because that is what the industry would like, and that is what the country would like, because we'd like a stronger balance of payments, we'd like more tax revenues for the Exchequer, and we'd like a future for the North Sea oil industry. What is the point of choking off our own North Sea oil and gas industry when we have to import those fuels from other countries?
Well, we will respond to the consultation question on the future of licensing in due course. It was our manifesto commitment on which this government was elected to not issue new licences to explore new fields, but we will support existing licences and existing fields for the lifetime that they exist for, and that remains our position. What we also have said, though, is that that is about how we manage the future of the basin, which has been in decline for 20+ years now. We hit peak oil and peak gas in 1999 and 2000, respectively. We have been in transition for a long time. That means investing in the industries that come next alongside oil and gas.
Stella Crease.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And following on from that question, can I just say how reassured I am that it is this Minister looking at this, fighting for those jobs for those people in Aberdeen, but also acutely aware that the previous government did not take full account of what impact the Shadow Minister raised Rosebank. We now know that Rosebank would create 50 times more climate-harming gases than it originally admitted to the previous government that it would do. And we know that the climate crisis is one of the biggest drags on growth that there is. So can I ask the Minister just to set out, I know he is as committed as we all are to protecting jobs and protecting the planet. What more can we do within our supply chains to support the work that he is doing and get those growth and get the just transition that this country desperately needs without Rosebank?
Well, I think the House will understand that I won't be drawn at all on applications that are currently in for decision, so I won't comment at all on that specific application. But I would take the broader point. It was raised earlier that the net zero economy is growing 3 times faster than the economy at large. It is our economic future. I was at the G20 in South Africa recently, where ministers across the world were talking about the opportunities of the clean power transition in their own countries. This is the economic opportunity of the 21st century. It's also how we deliver on climate leadership, which does still matter, contrary to what opposition politicians might now think. But it is also only right if we deliver it with a genuinely just transition for those workers that have powered our country for the past 60 years. We have seen where transitions have not been done well. The previous government failed to put in place any kind of plan. We're not going to do the same. We're going to deliver a plan that delivers a just transition and also our economic future.
Ms. Logan.
Mr. Speaker, I hear the Minister's reassuring words, but surely he can understand the worry of the workers waking up this morning to the news that they heard. And it's not just warm words that are causing the problem, it's policies. It's the energy profits levy, it's the ban on exploration. And it's not just me that's saying this. Here's a list of some of the people that are concerned. The Port of Aberdeen, Robert Gordon University, the North Sea Transition Authority, the Tony Blair Institute, the Scottish Affairs Committee. So what is the Minister going to do in terms of addressing these policy problems?
Can I thank him for his tone? And just to repeat that I absolutely accept the point that he makes. Of course, I'm saying today that we can be absolutely clear about the viable future of these 2,000 workers, and we should be positive about it, but that does nothing to those who might be worried about it. And of course I recognise that point. I just think it's also important that we talk up the future potential of this company. On the point on EPL, which I'm just going to come to, look, we accept that the EPL will come to an end. We've consulted with industry on what the future of that looks like to make sure that price spikes do result in the Treasury gaining some value from that. I think that's a principle that his party and mine are agreed on. That's rightly a matter for the Chancellor to take forward. But I think if he is in favour of a tax cut for oil and gas, it is quite important that he says where will that significant amount of revenue come from to fund the public services that he and I rely on.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's mention of tiebacks in a recent consultation earlier this year. But their development is important because it reduces costs and extends the life of existing critical infrastructure. However, many existing hubs are reaching the end of their life. We may miss the opportunities that are in front of us. So will the Minister look at tiebacks as a pragmatic step to help aid the transition?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who is always a great champion for this industry, and although we often talk quite rightly about Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland, she's also right to champion her own community, which has a significant number of oil and gas workers in it as well, and I always welcome her straightforward challenge to me on many of these points. I'm not going to get into the detail of the response to the consultation, which we'll publish in due course, but we've been really clear that we want a credible long-term plan for the future of the North Sea. That's why we consulted on a range of factors, not just the future licensing position, and we will come to a pragmatic position on what the future of the North Sea looks like.
Julian Lewis.
How many years does the government estimate we shall have to keep importing foreign oil and gas as a result of not being allowed fully to exploit our own supplies?
Well, perhaps I would switch the question back to him and say, for how many years have we already been importing oil and gas? Because this comes to the fundamental point here. The party opposite wants to pretend that in July last year somehow we switched to becoming a net importer of oil and gas. That is not what happened. Over many, many years, his party oversaw that transition. And look, I recognise the geology of the basin means that to some degree there would not have been different decisions if we had been in government. That's the nature of the basin. What we could have done differently was see that the transition was happening and deliver the economic opportunities with what comes next. That's what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister share my concerns at the way that Reform and the Conservatives deny the reality of climate change and deny the fact that the best way to protect energy jobs and to protect people's jobs is to follow the Green Jobs plan? And does he also agree with me that nuclear, such as Heysham 1 and 2 in my constituency, and if I get my way, new nuclear at Heysham, are vital to the Clean Energy Jobs plan?
Well, I was going to say this might be a note of consensus across the House, but then, of course, I remembered the SNP have this ideological objection to nuclear in Scotland, so they won't benefit from the economic opportunities that come from thousands of well-paid, skilled, trade unionised jobs in nuclear. But we do believe that there is a long-term future for nuclear. That's why we announced funding for Sizewell C. It's why we concluded the SMR programme. It's why we have been working with the US government to bring forward private funding partnerships to make sure we're building the latest technology here in the UK. It comes with thousands of jobs. It helps deliver on our energy security long into the future, and it also helps tackle the climate, because this party does believe that the climate crisis is an existential threat to our future. We should do everything we can to tackle it.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So thousands more jobs at risk alongside the thousands of families and jobs at risk at the Lindsey Oil Refinery in Lincolnshire, all because of this government's policies about net stupid zero. And yet the Minister talks warmly about the growth prospects. for Petrofac. To grow, you need an industry. To have an industry, you need more oil and gas licences. So will the Minister change course and now allow the exploration and more licences to produce oil and gas in the North Sea?
Well, I'm not sure there was a hugely coherent argument there, because on the one hand he seems to say that the future might be in these clean energy jobs, but then he says, well, they might not be delivered fast enough, so we shouldn't bother doing it. Look, we think there is an important long-term future in delivering clean energy, including in his constituency, where many of these supply chain jobs will be delivered. He's against that economic investment. He should explain to his constituents and to the wider country why they want to make this country more energy dependent, not less energy dependent, why they are against the economic opportunities that this brings. And look, even if we disagree on the climate crisis, which I find staggering given all the evidence, but I accept he might bury his head in the sand on it, we should at least agree that there's a huge economic opportunity and an opportunity to maintain our energy security.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Baxton Gas Terminal in the Honourable Member for North Norfolk's constituency on the North Sea coast. It already provides up to 1/3 of our nation's gas supply. It is ideally placed to be a carbon capture and hydrogen hub. The Minister has just talked about jobs, and I do want those jobs in my area. So would the Minister recognise the vital role that the east of England plays, and would he back Baxton's plans to ensure its low-carbon future and help secure good local jobs?
My honourable friend is right to highlight that this was a huge opportunity that the previous government talked a lot about, but actually didn't move forward on delivering. We had in the spending review significant amounts of investment to move forward the carbon capture clusters, and we followed that up with specific investments over the past few months, and I've been privileged to visit some of these sites and to see the potential for maintaining existing jobs in industry while building jobs of the future in carbon capture. We are hugely positive about the future vision for carbon capture across the country as a way to tackle our emissions, to help us get to net zero, but also to create good industrial jobs in the process.
Martin Vickers.
I thank the Minister for the engagement we've had over the future of Lindsey Oil Refinery in my constituency. Is he in a position to give any indication of what support the government might give and when a final decision might be taken? And would you at least acknowledge that new licences in the North Sea would actually offer job opportunities for those people whose jobs are at risk?
Well, can I also thank him for the engagement that we've had on this issue? Obviously, the failure of the previous company that was running the Prax Lindsey Oil Refinery has had a really significant impact. We've been working to make sure that there is the process that the official receiver is going through is concluded as soon as possible. It's for them to decide who the potential buyers are. There is a short list of credible candidates that they are looking at, but given the nature of the insolvency, it's not for the government's decision to decide what's built there next. On his second point, look, I genuinely don't think that the licensing question is the future of jobs for that particular site. We want to build up an industry in that site for the future, that those are long-term sustainable jobs, and all the evidence we've seen about managing the future of the North Sea Basin is that while that's important for many years to come, it's not the long-term future for the North Sea.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to increase the number of skilled jobs in renewables and in hydrogen. I welcome the Minister's mention of the plan. Can he say more about the government's Clean Jobs plan? And in particular, can he say more about training and development for younger staff and also retraining for existing staff?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for the question, and particularly for mentioning, as he did at the end, retraining, because what we're seeing across the energy system at the moment is huge opportunities for people in the middle of careers to transfer into the energy system. We've been looking just in the past few weeks about a scheme to support veterans leaving the armed forces to get jobs building infrastructure. There's huge opportunities there if we can capitalise on this clean energy transition. We also need to invest in the future of the next generation of workers. In England, we're looking at technical training colleges to make that happen. Funding goes to the Scottish Government to do that in Scotland, and of course to the Welsh Government as well. The future of our energy system is clean energy. We want to make sure we've got the jobs and the training opportunities that go with it, so that people of the country get the economic advantage as well as the country getting the energy security.
Dr. Ellicha.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Petrofac news today has nothing to do with UK oil and gas policy. This is a company with a long history of financial challenges, mismanagement, fined millions for bribery, lost £6 billion in value since 2012, and now lost a contract with the Netherlands. Does the Minister therefore agree with me that any attempt to claim otherwise is blatant political point scoring by the Tories and others with a head-in-the-sand climate denial agenda and is a distraction from what really matters, which is ensuring that every worker's job who is affected by today's news is properly supported?
Well, look, I agree with the Honourable Lady on the wider point here, which is that, as I outlined in my opening answer, Petrofac has not had its troubles to seek. She outlined a number of those in her question there. But I want to reiterate that the UK arm of this business is a successful, growing business. We want to make sure that continues and that there's a buyer or another solution to make sure that that can continue long into the future. I think others will seek to politicise this for their own political narratives. I think it's incumbent on all of us to send as positive a message as we can to the workers, the suppliers and the customers of Petrofac that the UK arms continue to operate as normal and that we want that to continue into the future.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1,000+ people are losing their jobs in North Sea oil and gas every month. And contrary to the case that the Minister presents, of course, this declining basin still has, the industry says, 4 billion additional barrels that could be extracted if only there were new licences. So he tells the House, Mr. Speaker, that it's going to be needed for decades to come, and he cuts off all new supply, mortally damaging the whole supply chain of which Petrofac is part. So he can't deny responsibility, and he needs to persuade the Chancellor, if not his Secretary of State, who's probably beyond persuasion, that we need to move to a practical policy, new licences, optimise it, because green and fossil fuels don't need to be in tension. We want the transition, but we must keep the jobs for now.
Well, can I firstly say I welcome the Honourable Gentleman's recognition that we seldom hear from the front bench of his party these days, that this is a transition and that we want the economic opportunities of oil and gas and renewables, and it's a delight to hear him say that. I think his front bench should say that more often and talk up the phenomenal industry that actually, I have to say, his party should take a bit of credit for over the past 14 years, building so much of the renewables across the country, but they've turned away from that. On the licensing point, look, I can't remember at what point the Honourable Gentleman was in the government, but of course the previous government said they wouldn't issue new licences, then they briefly did, then they recognised that that was the wrong policy. I think it was the Liz Truss years where they changed around. The future is a tiny fraction of licences that have been issued have ever resulted in extraction from the North Sea. We'll manage existing licences for their lifespan. We'll have a pragmatic view on the future of the North Sea, which we'll announce in the coming weeks. But the long-term future of the North Sea doesn't lie in oil and gas. It lies in renewables, carbon capture and hydrogen.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister would consider whether it really is a just transition, because we are getting thousands of contractors arriving in the Highlands. They stay in workers' camps. There's very few legacy houses being agreed. They're not employing local people, and all in an area where we have the highest level of fuel poverty in Britain.
Well, firstly, let me say, Mr. Speaker, that you know winter has come when the Honourable Gentleman turns up in his lovely knitted jumpers, and it's a pleasure to see them back again. Yes. Can I say, look, he and I have had a number of conversations about this, and I recognise how seriously he takes it. I think there have been some good moves recently to look at legacies left behind, particularly on housing, in fact, where we're building housing that suits the workforce at the moment, but can be left behind for communities afterwards. There's a lot of work that we need to see in partnership with the Scottish Government, who of course have responsibility for housing policy, to make sure that those opportunities are taken forward. My honourable friend, the Minister for Consumers, will be saying much more in due course about our plan for warm homes. That will result in significant spending in Scotland, but in the hands of the Scottish Government, who have cut this budget time and time again. I hope they'll change their ways and help support his constituents to have warmer homes this winter.
So Desmond Swain.
Has he made any estimate of the likely impact on Petrofac and similar enterprises of the extension of the energy profits levy?
Well, as I've said in a number of answers now, the UK arm of Petrofac is a successful and growing business. The reason that its holding company went into administration today is a number of different factors, but the loss of an international contract, nothing to do with our policy in the North Sea.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, of course, climate change exists, just for our colleagues on the green benches, and we need green investment, we need green jobs, and we need the green transition. But isn't there a fundamental flaw at the heart of government's policy, and that is that it is ideologically driven. And have we not learned anything with Russia's invasion of Ukraine on energy security, energy sovereignty and energy independence? And I put it to the Minister with the greatest respect, in the medium to long term, if we continue down this track too quickly, too fast, without a stable transition for both workers and for the energy sector, that we could end up being the government could be in a position of undermining the UK's national security.
Well, I thank him for the way he's put the question. And I would firstly just say, look, energy security is at the heart of what we're trying to do, because our exposure to fossil fuels is what led to some of the most significant price spikes in all of our constituents' bills that they are still facing today. Our continued exposure to the impact of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, even though none of that Russian gas now reaches us, is because of the international markets that drive it forward. So the only way to take back control of our energy is by building the clean power system of the future. But the pace of that transition is absolutely right. We are driving forward momentum now to make sure that the investment comes forward to create the jobs in the economy right now. That's been successful, £50 billion just in the past year of private investment. My view is that we should have recognised 10 or 20 years ago, under the previous Labour government and under the previous Conservative government, that a transition was underway and put in place then a credible plan for protecting these jobs. That wasn't done, but we are now determined to do it so that the future transition for oil and gas workers is into good, well-paid jobs in renewables, carbon capture, hydrogen and other technologies, and so that we have a genuinely just and prosperous transition.
Job losses in the North Sea come from the lack of strategic energy transition plan. The same applies to nuclear in Wales, where the lack of a plan for Wilbur has seen nuclear jobs on Ynys fall to a record low. Does the Minister agree that future-proofing our energy industries against job losses and rising costs requires a clear strategy and timely decisions from this government?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady who takes every opportunity possible, quite rightly, to ask me about her constituency and a range of energy issues in her constituency, and I thank her for that. Look, the SMR programme we inherited from the previous government, we've concluded, Rolls-Royce winning that competition. The future of nuclear will be taken forward with our Hinkley Point C, Sizewell C, and the future of the SMR programme, but also private sector investment in the US and UK partnership to build it. The siting decisions on where the SMRs will be is under consideration by my honourable friend, the Minister for Nuclear, at the moment, and we'll have more to say about that in due course.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
For everyone who likes it. The government likes to tell people that growth is its first priority, but growth requires abundant and cheap energy. Does the Minister recognise that the current government's policy, the only thing it's growing by crippling the oil and gas industry, is domestic prices, business prices, and the number of job losses in the oil and gas industry?
No, I don't. And look, the clean power that we're trying to build is how we make sure we get gas off as the price setter on our system. Gas, at this moment in time, sets the price 80% of the time, despite it actually being clean power that's often powering the country. That's a problem that we have to get off so that all our constituents benefit, but also businesses benefit from cheaper power. And of course, the cheapest form of electricity that we can build at the moment is solar, and I know the Honourable Lady objects to a number of those schemes in her own constituency, as she's perfectly entitled to do. But I would say to the party opposite, if we want to build a power system that brings down bills, they have to support the infrastructure that goes with it.
Neil Shastrahurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And sadly, this is not an isolated case. Regrettably, it's a pattern of decline that we are seeing under this government. So can the Minister set out how many companies must go under before the government realises that Great Britain cannot build a resilient and secure energy system without shutting down the energy industry?
Well, let me just challenge the premise of his question once again. Petrofac's UK arm has not gone under. It is working today as it did yesterday and the day before and the day before, and it will the day after. It is a successful, growing business, and we have a responsibility to talk up that industry to make sure that it has a viable long-term future. We will continue working intensively in the next few days with the company to make that happen, but we do have a responsibility not to undermine a successful business, which is what the UK arm of Petrofac is. The company that went into administration today is the top co of Petrofac, which has no employees.
Richard Ford.
Deputy Speaker,
The UK's electricity price is set by gas 98% of the time. By contrast, the electricity price in the EU is set by gas less than 40% of the time. If the electricity price in the UK was set by the price of clean energy more often, wouldn't the UK be a more attractive destination for investment in energy generation?
Well, the honourable gentleman put it absolutely right, and I think the shadow front bench said no in response to that. Look, the only way that we deliver long-term energy security is to get off the rollercoaster of fossil fuels. The future is in clean energy. We see that across Europe, where nuclear and renewables are driving down the cost of electricity, but also insulating them from the price spikes that we've seen from things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are too exposed to gas at the moment, and that's why our electricity prices are high, even though for so much of the day our power is being generated by clean energy, which is considerably cheaper. Clean energy is the economic opportunity of the 21st century. It's how we deliver our energy security, how we tackle the climate crisis, but how we bring down bills for people now and in the long term.
Lewis Copping.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While Labour continue down the path of net zero, UK now imports over 40% of its total energy needs from overseas. With the UK being the second most expensive country in the world for household electricity, will the Minister issue new oil and gas licences so we can get oil and gas out of the North Sea to support jobs and help energy companies cut fuel costs for people right across these aisles?
Well, I don't know if it says in the footnote to his question that even if we were to issue new licences, what we would extract from that North Sea would be traded on the international market, and we would pay the price that is traded on the international market. So I'd like to understand his logic on how that helps us to bring down bills, which is not the case. Let me just be really clear. The long-term future of our energy system is in a mix of nuclear and also in renewables. Removing ourselves from the volatility of fossil fuels is the only way forward, but it's also the economic opportunity for his constituents and right across the House as we build this infrastructure here with a proper industrial strategy to create the jobs of the future.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister explain to my Farnham and Borden constituents how the ban on new drilling for oil and gas, whilst importing gas from other countries at a higher cost, is going to bring their bills down by £300? And when is that going to happen by?
Well, I'll say to his constituents and to anyone's constituents that we have seen over the past few years, his constituents have been paying the price, in fact, for what happens to our exposure to fossil fuels. It was the previous government that had to spend tens of billions of pounds reducing people's bills because of our exposure to fossil fuels. He's perhaps forgotten about that, but I can tell you his constituents will not have, because they're still paying the price for it. This government's determined not to make the same mistake again. They're willing to go back to the fossil fuel casino again and again and again and hope it gives them a better hand. We're going to build the clean power system of the future and bring down bills for good.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a number of constituents who work in the North Sea oil and gas industry and depend on that for their employment. The Minister will be aware that if a buyer is not found, the knock-on effect will not be limited to those families facing redundancy, but to a nation with energy security. So does the Minister not accept that the uncertain government support has had a natural effect on the future sustainability of this industry, and that we need to be realistic and acknowledge that government needs to continue to invest in the industry until we approach that far-off time when just perhaps we don't need that oil and gas?
Look, I always welcome the honourable gentleman's contributions in our many debates on energy here and in Westminster Hall. He's right, of course, that the impact of job losses go well beyond just the individuals. I would just reiterate in this case there have been no job losses in the UK. This company continues to be successful and it's in all of our interests to make sure that remains the case. On his wider question, look, I know that the impact of supply chain jobs in his constituency and across the country are felt. That's why we need to build up building the new energy infrastructure here as well, because for too long all of those offshore wind platforms that were towed into British waters gave jobs to other countries instead of jobs here in the UK. We're determined to do something different about that, and that's why we're driving forward investment in the supply chains to make sure there's a viable future for his constituents and across the country.
And that concludes the urgent question. I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over for the House to settle. Statement. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make a statement on the release in error of Hadush Kebatu from HMP Chelmsford last Friday morning. As the House will be aware, Mr Kebatu was apprehended by the Metropolitan Police on Sunday morning in the Finsbury Park area of my constituency. He's back where he belongs, behind bars, and I'd like to thank the Metropolitan Police, Essex Police and the British Transport Police for their swift action to return him to custody, and the public who helped locate Kebatu after the police's appeal. I can tell the House that he will now be transported for deportation back to Ethiopia as quickly as possible. However, this does not change the fact that Mr Kebatu's victims are rightly outraged about what has happened. And I'm livid on their behalf. And on behalf of the public, this was a mistake that should not have happened. The victims expect better, the public expects better, and this government expects better from a critical public service, which plays a vital role in our first duty to keep the British people safe and free from harm. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Friday the 24th of October, Mr Kebatu was scheduled to be transferred from HMP Chelmsford to an immigration removal centre, from which he was to be deported. Due to what appears to have been human error, he was instead released into the community at 10:25 a.m. Shortly after 12 p.m, concerns were raised about the release to the duty governor, and following checks, staff were dispatched to locate him. When it became clear that he was no longer in the vicinity of the prison, Essex Police were notified and a manhunt began. Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service instigated an immediate investigation, and I've asked for the initial findings to be with me this week. And the House will appreciate that in the meantime there is a limit, obviously, on what I can say, but members will be aware that there are national security considerations within a case like this, and I will update the House in the appropriate way as soon as I can. But what I can say today is that there must and there will be accountability for what has happened. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I was first informed of the release in error, I spoke immediately to the duty governor at Chelmsford and senior HMPPS leaders to understand what was known and seek assurances about the immediate measures being taken. I tasked my officials working through the night and coordinated a response with the Home Office and the police. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to the Home Secretary for her engagement over the weekend. I also chaired 3 operational meetings with the police, and on Sunday was able to travel to Wood Green Police Station just outside my constituency to personally thank the police officers who caught Kebatu. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been clear from the outset that a mistake of this nature is unacceptable. We must get to the bottom of what happened and take immediate action to try and prevent similar releases in error to protect the public from harm. First, on Friday, I instructed the CEO of Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service to carry out an urgent review, to look at the checks that take place when a prisoner is released and identify immediate changes that can be made to the process in order to mitigate against the risks of release in error. As a result, HMPPS have taken steps to make these processes more robust. There will now be more direct senior accountability for ensuring protocols and checks are correctly applied, including a clear checklist for governors to determine that every step has been followed the evening before any release takes place. These are the strongest release checks that have ever been in place, and they will apply to every release from custody and are effective immediately. Second, any foreign national offender being removed through the early removal scheme, the scheme through which Kebatu was supposed to be removed from the country, can now only be discharged when the duty governor is physically present. And there will be no ERS removals from HMP Chelmsford for the rest of this week. And third, I'm today announcing that there will be an independent investigation by Dame Lynn Owers. I spoke to her yesterday, former Deputy Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police and Director General of the National Crime Agency, and she will fully establish the facts of Kebatu's release and whether staff had sufficient experience, training and technology, and she will also talk to the victims in this case to understand the effect this incident had on them. Her report will highlight points of failure and make recommendations to help prevent further releases in error, which have been rising year on year since 2021, going from 9 per month on average in 2023 to 17 per month in the period spanning January to June 2024. And I'm clear that a single release in error is one too many, which is why we have launched this independent investigation. And I can tell the House that it will have the same status as those into other prison incidents, including the awful attack on 3 prison officers at HMP Franklin in April of this year, and the escape of Daniel Khalife from HMP Wandsworth in 2023 under the last government. Madam Deputy Speaker, releases in error are a symptom of a system that we inherited from the party opposite.
Truth hurts.
Jails were full almost to breaking point, and the threat of total collapse in law and order. The fact is that we were left with prisons reeling from historic funding reductions. Madam Deputy Speaker, a 24% real terms cut from 2010 to 2015 and 30% cuts in staffing, leaving us today with over 50% of frontline prison officers having less than 5 years' experience. It's little wonder, then, when the system has been brought to its knees, that errors like this happen. We must also be honest that the previous government's approach to this crisis, piecemeal, complex emergency releases in the hope that the system wouldn't collapse, has added to a level of complexity and pressure that makes errors more likely. This government has been transparent about the difficult decisions necessary to fix the mess for good so that prisons can keep us safe, and future governments need not find emergency solutions to free up capacity. And this government has brought forward the sentencing bill currently making its way through this House. It will ensure we have a suitable criminal justice system, one which can deliver punishment that works, that cuts crime and keeps the public safe. And this government's also building 14,000 additional prison places so that we have capacity to lock up the most dangerous offenders. This is the largest prison expansion since the Victorian era. And let's be clear, there will be more people in prison at the end of this Parliament than there have ever been before. And we've already built 2,500 additional prison places in just over a year, compared to 500 added overall to the prison estate under the Tories. And we're deporting more foreign criminals than the last government. We've changed the law last month to speed up the early removal scheme, something that, to be fair, the Shadow Justice Secretary called for, so that most foreign prisoners can now be deported after serving 30% of their custodial sentence rather than the previous 50%. And through the sentencing bill, we will go even further to deport foreign criminals as soon as possible after sentencing. I can confirm that in the year to July 2025, we sent 5,179 foreign national offenders back to the countries of origin, a 14% increase on the previous 12 months. This frees up desperately needed prison places and saves the taxpayer the £54,000 per year in cost to hold an individual offender. Madam Deputy Speaker, this context sets out the scale of the challenge, but I'm clear that releases in error are not simply a fact of life. The public will not accept that, and neither does the government. We'll get to the bottom of what happened in this case. We will take whatever steps necessary to tackle the spike in releases in error, so that we can uphold the first duty of every government to keep the public safe from harm. I commend this statement to the House.
I call Robert Jenrick, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, dear, oh dear, where to begin? This Justice Secretary could not deport the only small boat migrant who who tried to be deported. Having been mistakenly released, Hadush Kebatu came back to prison asking to be deported, not once, not twice, but 5 times. But he was turned away. Madam Deputy Speaker, the only illegal migrants this government are stopping are those that actually want to leave the UK. His officials, briefing the press, called it the mother of all. Yeah, they're not wrong, are they? Calamity Lammy strikes again. It's a national embarrassment. And today, the Justice Secretary feigns anger at what's happened. He says he is livid Kebatu was mistakenly let out. But under his plans to abolish short prison sentences that he forced through the Commons last week, Kebatu would never have even stepped foot in prison in the first place. So let's get it straight. We had the spectacle of the Metropolitan Police scouring London to find a man the Justice Secretary is simultaneously legislating to avoid sending to prison. What an absolute farce. So look, I must commend the Justice Secretary's performance. It is truly BAFTA worthy. He has perfected the art of performative outrage to a T. On Wednesday, well look, they may be laughing, but let me finish this point. On Wednesday, he will force every one of his MPs to vote again on the sentencing bill, which will see hundreds of sex offenders, just like Kebatu, avoid prison altogether. Sick men who destroy the lives of young girls, who steal their childhoods from them, they will be free to roam your communities, to steal the childhoods of your constituents. And I'll tell you who'll be livid then. The British public will be livid, and they'll know who's to blame. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Justice Secretary says he's launched an inquiry into what's happened. But he should be able to provide some basic questions to the House now. With respect to the prison in question, HMP Chelmsford, there's clearly a very significant problem. In a previous internal audit at Chelmsford, officials had marked their own homework as good, yet inspectors rated it as of serious concern. What is the Justice Secretary going to do now to address the way in which problems in our prisons are covered up routinely or wished away? On the subject of the inquiry itself, you won't be surprised to hear I am, how shall I put it, sceptical about this government's ability to conduct inquiries with any competence. Why is it limiting itself to this particular security farce and not the other glaring errors, like the doubling of drone sightings above prisons, the soaring assault on prison officers, or the rampant extremism we're now seeing in our jails. Shocking as this accidental release is, it is not a one-off blunder. It has come to be the norm under this government, as the number of prisoners mistakenly let out early has more than doubled. So can the Justice Secretary tell the House how many of the 262 prisoners let out mistakenly in the year to March were violent or sexual offenders, and how many are still at large? There are now record numbers of foreign nationals clogging up our prisons, more than under the last government. How many of those 262 prisoners accidentally released are migrants, like Kebatu, who were awaiting deportation? Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Justice Secretary give the House his cast-iron assurance that this man will be deported from our country by the end of the week, as he promised on the news on Sunday? And if he fails, will he take responsibility and resign? And lastly, on Tuesday, the Justice Secretary blocked my amendment to release the migrant crime data. Does he now finally acknowledge that there is a link between the small boats and crime in this country? And will he call the small boats out for what they are, a national security emergency? Madam Deputy Speaker, this man should never have been in our country in the first place. That's the truth. He should have been detained. He should have been deported. Instead, he was put up in a hotel in Epping and allowed to prey on schoolgirls. Now we learn that some Labour officials privately concede that they were wrong to scrap the Rwanda plan. Be in no doubt, from start to finish, the Kebatu fiasco was a creation entirely of Labour's own making. So I say to the Justice Secretary, there's no point coming to the House today professing to be livid at the consequences of your own policies. The British people, they can see straight through you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a serious issue, and that's why there will be a full independent investigation. The Shadow Justice Secretary, I'll give him this, he's smooth. But as my mother would have said, if he was chocolate, he'd lick himself. He should hang his head in shame. The crisis in our prisons that we're faced today is because of 14 years of failure under his government. As they were packing their bags, and he knows this, to leave office, temporary release failures were under his watch. They presided over 17 mistaken releases per month. This didn't happen overnight. It was not inevitable. It was the choices that his party made through 14 years of chaos. They said that they were the government of security and safety. They oversaw rising violent crime and crumbling courts and crumbling prisons. Again and again, they promised 20,000 extra prison places, and they managed an extra 500 in 14 years. They promised to remove more foreign national offenders from prisons. They failed. They promised investment and expansion in the prison system, but budgets stalled. They promised investment in the police, but again, we saw the police cut by 20,000. They promised increases in access to justice. We did not see that. We saw almost the collapse of legal aid. Violence went up in our prisons. Self-harm went up in our prisons. Drug abuse went up in our prisons. And prison officer numbers were cut under his watch. And he comes here and has the brass neck to give the impression that this started just 14 months ago. Let me just pause there. William Fernandez was released in error in March 2021. He was a sexual predator. He raped a 16-year-old and sexually assaulted another young woman after he was let out by prison in 2021. Was there an independent investigation? No, not from their side. Rayan Nubi, released in error in March 2023. Again, a man who was mistaken released from a Category B prison. Was there an independent investigation under his watch? No, there wasn't. Laura Matavoulis, again released in error in December 2021. Was there any independent investigation? None at all. And he comes here with the brass neck. I've asked Lynn Owens to look at this. I've asked her if she can do it in 8 months. Of course, we'll come back to the House when in 8 weeks, when that is done. And all of what he has said, what happened, looking over this period of time, is subject to that review. And then he says that the sentencing review will actually let more foreign nationals out. He's wrong. We've actually brought down the threshold so that you can now be deported with just a suspended sentence. He knows that. Read clause 42 of the bill and he will understand it properly.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the pressure on prison front desks and the complexity of rules for release, this was an accident waiting to happen. One thing that might bring down the number of releases in error is the digitising of prisoner records. On visits to prisons, Justice Committee members are often horrified to find them relying on handwritten files. While some parts of the justice system are entertaining AI, why are prisons still run on pen and paper systems?
Minister.
Well, the right honourable friend raises a very important point, and he knows that up to this day, in part because of concerns about the use of technology by prisoners, there largely isn't Wi-Fi or anything like that available on our prison sites. And for that reason, it is a paper-based system which will always be subject to some human error. But in the context in which, under the last government, there was this continued early release scheme done on the quiet, and indeed because of the changes that we're making in the sentencing bill, it is right that we have a proper look at this. And I did discuss it with Lynn Owens when we spoke yesterday.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We in the Liberal Democrats are relieved that Kebatu has been recaptured after what must have been a terrifying few days for his victims, and echo the Justice Secretary's remarks thanking Essex Police, the Metropolitan Police and British Transport Police. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, his recapture doesn't excuse the serious mistakes that caused this to happen in the first place. It's totally unacceptable that the safety of the public was ever put at risk. HMP Chelmsford is a remand prison, one that regularly deals with prisoners coming and going, and therefore should be entirely capable of handling situations like this. Yet we know from His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons that there are deep-seated inadequacies at Chelmsford, including inexperienced staff and a lack of adequate training, especially identified in pre-release documents. At the same time, we have seen worrying trends nationally in mistaken prisoner releases, with 262 prisoners released by accident in the year 2025, up from 115 the year prior. So we in the Liberal Democrats do recognise that the government inherited a mess when it comes to prisons, but they should have taken serious steps to address the shortfalls and staffing issues in prisons, which are now clearly putting the public at risk. So I would like to ask the Secretary of State what steps his government is taking to address work culture and training issues in our prisons, especially those like HMP Chelmsford, where concerns have already been raised in the past. I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement of an independent investigation following repeated calls by my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, whose constituents were put at risk. But can he confirm what consequences those found at fault will face? And pending the outcome of the investigation, does he agree that anyone responsible should face the sack? Does he believe that the new safeguards that he is putting in place will prevent this from ever happening again? And finally, for Kebatu's victims, who will have spent the weekend incredibly distressed, what support was provided to those victims and their families over the weekend when they were aware of the perpetrator being at large, and will that support continue on?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for the tone of her remarks. And she's absolutely right that it was entirely unacceptable, and understandably, the victims of those crimes would have been very, very anxious, and their families over the course of the weekend, and the public at large would have been anxious, particularly women and children. She is right, however, that there are issues, because we now have 50% of staff in our prisons who are effectively new on the job as a result of what we inherited. And it is important that we give them the appropriate support and training over this period. She knows, because I've said it from this dispatch box, that it's our intention to grow the number of prison places and to build new prisons, 14,000 places by 2031. And in that context, it's important that we grow the number of officers as well and support them. She knows too the importance of probation in this context, and the 700 million that we've allocated to support our probation service at this time is really important. She will recognise that in a system that releases 57,000 prisoners every year, that many of those prisoners are released appropriately, under licence. Some of those prisoners are reporting to probation, they're reporting to home, they're reporting for tags, and many of them, a proportion that's gone up, are reporting for early removal. And it's for all of those reasons that it's important that Lynn Owers gets to the bottom of what happened in this circumstance.
Matt Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the weekend, we heard comments from party members opposite talking about this being the Labour Party releasing this prisoner early. This is a rather silly comment. The Labour Party didn't release anybody. Okay. However, I wonder if the Deputy Prime Minister would agree with me that actually what does cause, contribute and create problems such as where these mistakes can genuinely happen has not come from the 14 months we've been in power, but the 14 years of austerity and cuts that the party opposite caused.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I just think, as a statement of fact, the party opposite does recognise the inheritance that we had in this context was poor. Now, the public want to ensure that whomever is in government keeps them safe, and that people aren't being released from prison in the wrong way. And that's why it's important that there's a full independent investigation into this, and that the system learns the lessons. I listed previous cases where there was no full or independent investigation. We could have learnt from this earlier if the other party had acted.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
The crisis about small boats crossing the Channel is utterly debilitating and is alienating millions of people from the whole political process. And imagine how the whole atmosphere would lighten if the government had come here today and said, this sort of farce can't continue, and from midnight tonight, if you land illegally on these shores, we will get out of any convention, you will be detained and deported immediately from where you've come from. But I want to ask a particular constituency point. Such is the crisis around how to house people. There are reports today in the Times and other newspapers that the government is thinking of opening disused military sites and is looking at 2 or 3 in particular. Now, the government gave a solemn promise that they would not use RAF Scampton to house illegal migrants. Can you confirm that solemn promise still stands?
Secretary of State.
He's heard, and he heard the Housing Secretary talking about this morning, that we are looking at military sites, and there are a number of them that we're looking intently at. I'm afraid I'm unable to give him the reassurance in relation to his own constituency, because I haven't got the list in front of me, but I will ensure that the appropriate minister makes contact with him.
Maureen de Just.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is, of course, deeply concerning that a dangerous criminal was released onto the streets, and this should not have happened. But I do want to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his honest assessment of what happened and for acknowledging that what happened was wrong. But does he agree with me that we are actually dealing with 14 years of Tory neglect with overcrowded and understaffed prisons, and when things go wrong, as they have done, it is essential that we take swift and decisive action so that the public trust in the justice system is maintained, and that is exactly what we are doing now.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. The truth is that under this government, in our first year in office, over 5,100 foreign national offenders were removed from this country. That's the truth. We've removed 2,500 more from prison than in recent times. And the truth is, under the last government, there were 800 releases in error and no full independent investigation. That is the truth, and it's under this watch that we're going to change that.
Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The trial, sentencing and mistaken release of Hadush Kebatu all took place in the heart of my Chelmsford constituency, and it is entirely unacceptable. I firstly want to thank Essex Police, British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police, as well as the public's vigilance, for ensuring that he was apprehended and will now be deported. I welcome the announcement of an independent investigation, but the government must ensure that any recommendations are implemented in full, without delay, and not just left to gather dust on a bookshelf. Turning to prison leadership, does the Justice Secretary agree with me that scapegoating a single prison officer for systemic failure is unacceptable, and that if leaders, including prison governors, are found to be at fault, they should resign?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady, and I know that this has been shocking for her constituents, and I know that the reports and the scenes of this prisoner wandering around Chelmsford will have been incredibly disturbing, and particularly disturbing for the victims of her crime. And I know that she has spoken to the prisons minister, and I'm very grateful that she reached out in the way that she has, and I think she's spoken to the governor as well. Now, I know that we have suspended the officer involved pending an investigation. That must be right and proper. But I hope that she will recognise, in asking Dame Lynn Owens to look at this closely, that of course we will take seriously her recommendations, and I will ensure that this House has full scrutiny of those recommendations when they come forward.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The case of Kebatu exposed deep failings in our prison system. As a result, as we heard, 14 years of failure by the previous Tory government. Failings made worse by chronic staff shortages. Now, the immediate reckless skilled visa rule change risks forcing hundreds of experienced overseas officers out of the service overnight. At HMP Liverpool, 40% of staff could be affected. So can the Minister explain how stripping our prisons of trained staff will make them safer or help prevent further failures like these seen in Mr Kebatu's case?
Very grateful to my honourable friend, and I want to reassure her that the prison minister is talking to Home Office colleagues about these very same issues at this time.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, my thoughts are with the victims of this sex offender's crimes, including the 14-year-old Epping schoolgirl. They and their families want answers as to how this major breach could have happened. Now, the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary have said that they were appalled and livid. Well, that's great. So is everyone. But ministers are not commentators. Exactly. They are in charge, and ultimately, they are accountable for this. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, this hasn't gone away for the people of Epping. The twice-weekly protests continue. No one wants to see our town repeatedly the lead story in the news, and the events of recent days have raised again community anxiety and distress. Will the government now get a grip on this issue, address the illegal immigration crisis that has spun out of control on their watch, and do the right and safe thing and close the Bell Hotel immediately?
Secretary of State.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right in the beginning of his question to centre the victims of these crimes and their anxiety and to hold that dear. And it's why the first thing I said to Lynn Owens was, would she reach out to those victims and just hear from them as she went about her work. I'm quite sure, because I know Epping very well, I'm quite sure that his constituents know that the crisis that we inherited begun under the last government, and their discontent in relation to asylum and immigration, the inability of the last government to deal with the gangs, the collapse of the Rwanda scheme, and the outrage of asylum hotels all begun under the last government, and he knows that as well as I do.
Chris Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right friend, Deputy Prime Minister, for coming today to address this serious issue. Many of my constituents raised it with me over the weekend. I do notice not a single member from Reform here, especially the member for Runcorn. I'm assuming she's still running scared after horrific racist remarks over the weekend. But can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that deportation of Kebatu will proceed unhindered and without delay?
Order. I'd ask the honourable gentleman to ponder on his words and perhaps suggest that he does withdraw that remark that he's just made about another honourable member from this chamber.
Okay, on your advice, I withdraw that remark. So, to finish my question, will the Deputy Prime Minister ensure that there is a swift plan that when mistakes are made, it's essential to ensure that public trust is remained in these justice systems?
State.
Well, my honourable friend is right. And it's hugely important because it's important to put in context not only the victims who would have been anxious, but also the inheritance of the backlog in our courts so that people can't get justice. He's right also to reference the honourable member for Runcorn, who I see is not in her seat, despite her very inflammatory statements over the weekend.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is outrageous that Kebatu was not deported at the end of his sentence. What is worse is that the number of prisoners released by mistake has more than doubled under this government. Now, if the Deputy Prime Minister is determined to release thousands more prisoners early, how confident is he that this mistake will not be repeated again and again on his watch?
Secretary of State.
Well, can I say to him that there is actually a point of agreement between the two main parties, and that is that foreign national offenders who commit crimes should be deported as quickly as possible. And under the sentencing bill, we are attempting to do that. And it's actually something that the Shadow Justice Secretary has raised, and I think that's one point at least of agreement. I'm serious about getting to grips with the early release issue. And I'm serious when I say, and he knows this, that this story begun before we came to office. It's why one of our most senior police officers will be looking at this issue, and of course we will take serious all of her recommendations. It's hugely important that the public see the system working and that they feel safe.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Hadush Kebatu is clearly a depraved individual and a dangerous pervert who should be booted out of the country without delay. But my constituents get sick and tired of having to foot the bill of the cost of housing foreign national offenders in British jails. And so, therefore, can he reassure them that the sentencing bill will make it much easier to deport those individuals and make sure they're in foreign jails where they belong rather than clogging up our prisons?
Well, my honourable friend's exactly right. £54,000 it costs a year to have any individual in prison in our country. It's a lot of money. And that's why it's important that we reduce the period that they're in our country and that once they've been convicted and served 30% of their time, that we can deport them back to where they come from. And that's where, of course, Kebatu should be and should experience over the course of the next few days.
Tessamont, is you rising? Tessamont? No.
Richard Ford.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the breakout from prison of Hadush Kebatu sounds less like the Great Escape and more like Fawlty Towers. It has helped bring to light that 262 prisoners were released by mistake last year and 115 were released by mistake the year before. For mistaken releases, what assurance can the Justice Secretary offer that the responsible contractors or subcontractors will be subject to the sort of financial penalties that motivate them to prevent further mistakes from happening?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm not sure in this circumstance that this was subcontracted. He will understand that when we look at the 56,000 or so prisoners who are released from prison, many are being released into the hands of probation and asked to report to a probation office. Some are released for time served. There are both housing, employment, assessment needs, and he's right, I think behind his question, many are tagged at home. For some reason, Kebatu found himself in the wrong stream because for foreign national offenders, it's an immigration removal centre and it's off on a plane, and that's what should have happened.
Justice Sato.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the fact that Dame Lynn Owens will be speaking to the victims of Kebatu to understand the impact on them. But can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether the previous government made any steps to speak with victims affected by prison release errors under their watch due to starving the system of funding?
Secretary of State.
There were many cases of early prisoner release, and as I said before, whether it was William Fernandez in March 2021, whether it was Rayon Nubi in March 2023, or Loris Matavusas in December 2021, there were no independent investigations under the last government. Very little was said, or it would seem learned, even though 800 were released early. So this is a story that goes back a long way. It's in part because of the scheme that was set up under the last government and revised 4 times in the run-up to the general election, and it's why we must take a thorough look and reassure the public.
Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Justice Secretary will know that police operational independence, free from political interference, is crucial and is enshrined in the police protocol. And yet on page 3 of the statement which the Secretary of State has just given us this afternoon, he told us, and I checked against delivery, over the weekend I chaired 3 operational meetings with the police.
Yeah, what's that all about?
What's changed?
Secretary of State.
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has a tremendous experience in this chamber. I think he would think it was extremely lackadaisical if the Justice Secretary did not seek operational update from the police over the course of the weekend when this was top of the news cycle and of huge anxiety. Of course, operational matters are for the police, but I'm hugely grateful, and I said so to Mark Rowley this morning, and I was very pleased that it's local officers in the London Borough of Haringey that were able to detain Kebatu, and that's why I went up to Wood Green to thank them personally for what they had done.
Jonathan Davies.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The erroneous release of this individual was an appalling error. I'm grateful that it has been caught and that the Justice Secretary will take steps to get to the bottom of what went wrong in this case. And I will be grateful if he comes back to the House in due course to report on his findings. Now, we know this government, when it started last year, inherited an appalling situation in respect of the prison estates, prisons fit to bursting and short staff. In fact, perhaps that's when the general election came when it did, rather than in the autumn, because there would have had to have been a prisoner release scheme later that year under the previous government. But I am sick of people coming to my constituency surgeries who have been victims of crime, who feel that justice is not being done. So can I urge him to redouble his efforts for this, to build up the prison places, but also take the steps to ensure that people, certainly at lower levels of crime, don't get into crime in the first place, because that's the way we save money in the long run.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he's right to mention the end of early supervision licence scheme that was set up by the last government, revised 4 times, 10,000 people were released. It was done effectively on the quiet, it was done in a chaotic way, and that's when we began to see this spike. It's not about making partisan or political points, but the truth is we all know that the prison system that we inherited was in a dire situation, and we do need now to get a grip where mistakes are being made, and that's why the officer involved is suspended under investigation. The checks and balances in place are now the toughest that we've had. We're asking duty governors to be looking at this the night before, particularly in relation to foreign national offenders, and we've got Dame Lynn Owens doing a further investigation.
Ms Savile Roberts.
I'd like to put on record my role as the co-chair of the Justice Union's parliamentary group. Everyone here will want to make sure that this kind of outrageous error never happens again. The Chief Inspector of Prisons warned today of a systematic problem of increased releases in error, citing very busy people, often quite inexperienced, with huge caseloads. He also warned that prisons are dependent on West African officers who we might now lose thanks to changes to visa thresholds expected to cause, and I quote, an enormously damaging effect to some prisons. With this in mind, because his government has control over this, will the Justice Secretary press the Home Office to look again at how changes to the skilled workers visa are directly causing prison staff shortages and worsening prison performance?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for putting on record the challenge that we have with junior staff, and I'm very grateful to the work that we have in our prison system of those staff who are much beloved, who have come from West Africa, largely Nigeria, to support this system for a period of time. And I do recognise the challenges that she articulates, and of course, as she would expect, all of these matters are under discussion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement today. I can also thank the member for Epping for him starting his question with a recognition that this really affects the victims of this terrible crime. And I think we all need to recognise the devastating effect this will have on families who are victims of crime when the person who's committed those crimes is released in this way. What reassurance can the Deputy Prime Minister give residents in my constituency of Harlow that this government will finally get on top of this issue, get on the front foot of this issue and finally tackle it?
Secretary of State.
Well, can I begin by just wishing my honourable friend congratulations. I know he's just returning from paternity leave. We're grateful to that. And, you know, I know his constituency of Harlow very, very well. I think it's got one of the highest proportions of Spurs supporters in the country. And I know those folk would have taken this very seriously. And I'd want to reassure them that we've asked one of our best senior police officers to lead this review, where we put in place immediate checks in the system that are the toughest that have ever been in place, really, for release. Of course, the officer involved has had to be suspended pending that full investigation, and the prison service themselves are doing their own investigation immediately begun that will report to me later on this week.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Mr. Kebatu came to this country by small boat, allegedly because he was seeking asylum against oppression in Ethiopia. At his trial, however, he changed his mind and decided he'd rather be back in Ethiopia. What bothers me about the state of our immigration system is that if, after he has been punished in Ethiopia, he hops on another small boat and comes back again and says that he's seeking asylum because, as a result of his conviction for sexual crimes, he faces disapproval and possibly persecution in Ethiopia, we'd have to go through this farce all over again, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Secretary of State.
Well, I recognise the concern that may well be on the minds of his constituents and indeed mine. But the biometric system that we have in place should alleviate that, of course. And he's right. In the trial, he said he wanted to go back to Ethiopia, and that is where he now belongs.
Sian Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has rightly talked about prisons reeling from historic funding and staffing cuts. Yet he admits that other current ministers have added to this problem by changing the visa rules in July that will force many overseas prison officers out of the country. He just called them much beloved staff. He just said that he recognises the challenges. So will he confirm that he has asked the Home Secretary to look again at her visa changes for these prison officers?
It's my job to ensure that we have the right amount of prison officers in the system and that they're supported to do their job. And I'd want to tell her that, of course, she would expect that that is a #1 priority for the department, the right number of prison officers to do the job, recognising that many of them are now have little experience as a result of the changes that were made under the last government, but also the right number of probation staff, and we are doing both.
Wendy Martin.
Deputy Speaker, this accidental release of Kebatu is beyond belief. It's a national embarrassment. But what I find really, really disturbing is being sitting here on the backbenches watching the Justice Secretary laugh at some of the responses. And I find that wholly unpalatable. And I am left wondering what the victims must be thinking. When will he resign?
I've got a lot of respect for the Right Honourable Lady. I just remind her that I'm not sure that the Shadow Justice Secretary mentioned the victims once in his contribution this afternoon.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we all know that it is the notoriety of the Kebatu case which has brought the Justice Secretary to the House today. But we also know that in the year 24-25, there were 262 such wrongful releases. How many independent investigations were held into any of those? With what result? And how do we get to the point where, on average, we have 5 wrongful releases per week? Shouldn't action have been taken long ago?
Well, I agree with him that action should have been taken long ago when this story began under the last government. That action is beginning now.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The fundamental responsibility of any government is to keep its citizens safe. But from the mistaken release of a dangerous foreign sex offender to scrapping future prison sentences for over half of offenders, which side is Labour on? The side of hard-working, law-abiding British public, or the criminals that target and exploit them?
Secretary of State.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman that I think his constituents will be pleased that we are increasing the number of prison places after the horrific legacy from the last government, that we're reversing some of the cuts that we saw under the last government, that we've got a sentencing bill passing through this Parliament, and that we will be coming forward with a courts bill, all to deal with the chaos that we inherited in our justice system. And I've got to tell him, it's really rich when we're talking to a party that cut 20,000 police officers in our country.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say to the Justice Secretary, it is wearing a bit thin referring to the last government's record. This government has been in power for over 12 months, so it just isn't going to wash with the British public. Can I also say to the Justice Secretary, I think he does his calm better than he does his livid. He mentioned to my honourable friend, the member from North Dorset, I think he paraphrased his own statement, but his statement clearly says that he did chair, exact words, over the weekend I chaired not one, but 3 operational meetings with the police. And members across this House, on all sides of the House, will know we can attend strategy meetings, but we never interfere with operational matters. So I think the House and members of the public, and indeed police officers around this country, deserve more clarity on that. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, it says in the statement, page 2, members will also be aware that there are national security considerations with a case like this. What are those national security considerations? It's a bit confusing. First time I've heard this is an open court criminal conviction. So what are the national security implications? And finally, just so he knows I haven't gone too tough on him today, can I commend his decision to appoint Dame Lynn Owens a first-class public servant?
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. We're actually friends, despite the nature of his questioning. I think it is important that the police were able to give me an operational update, and I thank them for the work that they did across the Metropolitan Essex and the British Transport Police, and I'm sure that his constituents value that. And look, I'm sorry that he doesn't want me to mention the record of the last government, but I've got a feeling that as he sat there on the benches when they were in government, he was hugely disappointed with their record on crime and their record on the justice system.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the House will be aware, I was once a Epping Forest District Councillor and an Essex County Councillor, so I know both Epping and Chelmsford. It's fair to say that, given the high-profile nature of this particular case, public confidence is at an all-time low. Did the Justice Secretary consider his position? And if not, why not?
I really think that's a ridiculous question. He knows the answer. The answer is no. What I considered carefully was what my predecessors were up to in the last government, to allow this spike, to do nothing about it. And when I looked at the cases, particularly the case involving someone who was let out and went on to commit a sexual assault, I wondered why there were no independent investigations set up under the last government.
Paul Carter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Justice Secretary admits, there's a staffing crisis in our prisons, which his government inherited from the brass-neck Tories. Over one-third of prison officers now have less than 2 years' experience. With too many officers leaving the profession and too few joining, is it any wonder mistakes like this happen increasingly frequently? But whilst the Ministry of Justice has sought to address the prison officer shortfall by recruiting overseas, as we've heard, the Home Office is undermining those actions by raising the payment threshold for the skilled worker visa. So, can I ask the Justice Secretary simply, yes or no, is the Justice Secretary asking the Home Office to add prison officers to the skills shortage list?
Secretary of State.
Well, as I've said, it's right and proper that the Home Office has a thorough regime for skilled workers, and I would support them in that endeavour. It's also important that we have the bank of prison officers that we need, and it's my job to ensure that we have that, whether they are able to come from abroad or whether, of course, as the vast majority of them do, come from our own country.
Luke Evans.
Almost a dozen pages in the statement, almost an hour taking questions, and I haven't heard one word. Sorry. And that's really important, actually, particularly for the father and the 14-year-old victim. Now, the Justice Secretary said a number of times he's personally reached out and thanked the police. Has he personally reached out to the victims? Has he tried to speak to them? Has he tried to say sorry?
Well, of course I'm sorry. Sorry that any victim of crime had the anxious weekend that they had. And it was important for me to ensure that police liaison were in touch with them, and I'm grateful to Essex Police to do that. And important to me that Lynn Owens is able to speak to them so that their concerns are reflected in her full and final report.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How many of those released in error under this Labour government are still at large?
Secretary of State.
As she would expect, there are a number of people released under different regimes. Some of them will be released at home and will be leaving hopefully productive lives. Others will be back in prison. Some are recalled under licence. All of this will be examined by the independent full investigation.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The fact of the matter is that some 262 prisoners were freed in error in the year to March, almost an epidemic, compared to 115, 128% increase according to data from the Ministry of Justice own department. I have absolute respect for the Honourable Gentleman, he knows that. But does the Minister accept that this is absolutely shameful, exemplifies the changes that are needed within our justice system to restore justice, and remind people that the penalty of crime is to lose their way of life and their rights, and not simply a holding cell where they tap their fingers waiting while serving a fraction of their sentence and hoping that they are one of the growing number to simply be sent home without being rehabilitated, which should rather be detained within the system. Thank you.
Yes, I'd want to associate myself with all the remarks made by the honourable gentleman. He's completely right. It's totally unacceptable. People who commit crimes deserve to be punished. I think the public wants them also to be rehabilitated. It's got to be punishment that works. To released in an appropriate fashion, but to be released into the community or sent back to their country in the appropriate way, and we've got to ensure that the system gets that right every single time.
And that concludes the statement. Point of order, Dawn Butler.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Saturday, the member for Runcorn and Helsby said, "It drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people." The member also said, "It doesn't reflect our society." Madam Deputy Speaker, as the MP for Brent East, one of the most diverse constituencies in the UK, you can be black and brown and be British, so I'm completely offended by that comment. It is a racist comment, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can you imagine the constituents of that MP going to see her knowing that she's a racist? Madam Deputy Speaker, these comments appear to be in breach of MP's Code of Conduct, in particular the 7 Principles of Public Life.
Order, order. Can the Honourable Lady please reflect on her language and withdraw the remark about another Honourable Member in this place?
Madam Deputy Speaker, that comment is absolutely a racist comment. And if we cannot call that comment out in this House, that is in breach of the Nolan Principles for MPs. And I want to know, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you can help me in ensuring that...
Order. For clarity's sake, it's the calling of a member of this House a racist.
Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that, let me just quote again what the member for Runcorn and Helsby said. It drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people and full of Asian people. It doesn't reflect society. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is a racist comment. And it is against the Nolan principles. And how can we ensure that members of Parliament abide by the Nolan principles?
It's not the comment that the honourable member is referring to. It's the fact that that she called the member a racist that is the issue. If you can please reflect on your remarks of calling a member of this House a racist and stick to the comments being a racist. It may be that she considers that that is dancing on the pin of her head, but it's important that we all act with respect and set an example to the country.
Given me deja vu, I appreciate that in this House that we are not supposed to be disrespectful and call members of Parliament, MPs, what they actually are. Ultimately, the comment is a racist comment. It's quite strange that I'm unable to call out the member for being a racist, having made a racist comment.
Order. Please, it's time and time again. Can you please consider withdrawing the comment about a member of this House being a racist?
I don't want to be thrown out of Parliament again. So I will withdraw the fact that I am referring to the Member of Parliament as a racist because of her racist comments.
Has she informed the member for Runcorn and Helsby that she intended to refer to her in the chamber?
I have.
The Chair is not responsible for comments made by individual members outside this place. If the honourable member considers there has been a breach of the Code of Conduct, the proper procedure is to complain to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. Point of order, Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a point of order on the same person but a different point. I rise in a point of order to raise a matter of both parliamentary courtesy and political accountability. I have been informed that the member for Runcorn and Helsby last week held a political meeting in my Liverpool Riverside constituency with any prior notification to me. I have informed the member that I would be raising this as a point of order. And while there is no formal rule preventing members from visiting other constituencies, it is a fundamental convention of this House that MPs respect the local representation of their colleagues and notify them before seeking to engage with their constituents. They know they're not welcome coming into my constituency stirring hate and division. To ignore this convention of the House is discourteous. To do so in a city like mine with a very long and proud history of diversity is politically provocative. I call on the House to recognise that such actions undermine the norms of mutual respect between members and disregard the rights of constituents to be represented by their elected MP. The people of Liverpool Riverside do not welcome this opportunistic political activity. Does the Deputy Speaker agree with me that this matter requires urgent attention, and can she reaffirm, can the Deputy Leader of the House reaffirmed the principle that parliamentary conventions and respect for local representation must be upheld by all members?
I thank the honourable member for her point of order and for confirming that she has notified the member for Runcorn and Helsby in advance. Mr Speaker has always been clear that members intended to visit another colleague's constituency, except for purely private purposes, must inform colleagues in advance. Point of order, Simon Hoare.
The Honourable Lady for Brent East is absolutely right to draw the House's attention to the Nolan principles of public life, and they fall within the auspices of my Select Committee to keep a weather eye on, and of course it's an important anniversary of the Nolan principles this year. Given the fact that it is an important anniversary, and given the fact that the government has pulled together a whole variety of propriety and ethics under one body, might it now not be appropriate for the authorities of this place to reissue to all members what those principles are, that they are as enduring and relevant today as they were when Lord Nolan first penned them, and if we all abided by them fully all of the time, political and public life may be a little better.
I thank the honourable member for his point of order. It's a very interesting idea. They are set out in the Code of Conduct, but I'll make sure that Mr Speaker is aware of his comments. I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that the King has signified his royal assent to the following acts. Bus Services Act 2025, Deprivation of Citizenship Orders, Effect During Appeal Act 2025, Renters' Rights Act 2025, Absent Voting, Elections in Scotland and Wales Act 2025, General Cemetery Act 2025. We now move on to the business of the day. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Victims and Courts Bill as amended in the Public Bill Committee to be considered.
Now.
We will begin with Government New Clause 13, with which it will be convenient to consider the other selected new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move Government New Clause 13. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is truly an honour to open this debate and to bring the Victims and Courts Bill before the House. This bill is about people. Victims who have suffered unimaginable trauma, their families, and ensuring that they receive justice. It is about restoring faith in our justice system that can often feel cold and confusing. And this delivers on this government's driving mission for safer streets, making sure victims are supported, that offenders are held to account, and that justice is delivered swiftly and fairly. The deep-rooted issues in our criminal justice system need no repeating here. The House knows that this is a system that requires large-scale reform after years of neglect. There is a long road ahead, but this bill takes an important step forward. At its core are victims' experiences. This government is bringing forward real, tangible measures to ensure that victims' voices are heard, that their needs are recognised, and that their rights are respected. This will strengthen our courts, improving efficiency and fairness across the system. Madam Deputy Speaker, these are much-needed changes, and I am deeply grateful to honourable and right honourable members on all sides of this House for their time, their insight in considering them, and indeed to all of the organisations, advocates and survivors who have shared their experiences and helped us shape this legislation. I am sure the House will therefore join me in paying tribute to the families of Jan Mustafa, Olivia Pratt-Cobell, Zara Alina and Sabina Nessa. And I would like to welcome to this place Aisha Hussein, Cheryl Corbell and Antonia Elverson. They are in the public gallery today. I would also like to thank Jabina Islam, Farah Naz, the Justice for Victims group, which includes Susan and Jeremy Everard, Glenn and Becky Eunice, Katie Brett, Paula Hudgell, Aisha Hussein, the Bethan family, all for their courage and strength in campaigning amongst immense grief for their loved ones. 3 government amendments at report stage have further strengthened this bill, delivering clearer, stronger protection for victims, and I will turn to these briefly now, and again thank you all to everyone who has worked so constructively with me and officials in the Ministry of Justice to discuss the issues and concerns. New Clause 14 and Amendments 12 to 21 restrict the exercise of parental responsibility for perpetrators of rape where their crime has resulted in the birth of a child. This amendment will of course protect children, but it will also help shield the victim from their perpetrator interfering in their lives. Because those who commit this horrific crime should clearly never be able to use parental rights to control or torment their victim. I would like to take a moment to pay tribute to a woman I am proud to call my colleague and even prouder to call my friend. Many in this House will already have deep admiration for the member for Bolsover. And I want to place on record that this change is hers. It is for her, her children, and those just like them up and down the country that she has dedicated her life to fighting tirelessly for.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I want to add my personal admiration to the member for Bolsover, who has been a fantastic champion for this particular new clause. Her predecessor in this House was called the Beast of Bolsover. I think she's the Brave of Bolsover, because every time she speaks in this House, she's incredibly brave, and I want to pay tribute to her.
Hear, hear, I echo those sentiments entirely. It has genuinely been my privilege to hear her story and to work with her to ensure that this measure works to stop rapists taking an active role in a child's life when that child was conceived as a result of rape. I cannot imagine the enormous complexity that mothers such as her face in this situation, and I am in awe of her bravery and that of so many others. This measure will ensure that rapists cannot take active steps in a child's life where that child has been conceived as a result of the crime that they have been convicted for. And in order to protect as many children as possible, our measure features a two-track process. Where the Crown Court is satisfied that the child was conceived of rape, it must make a prohibited steps order restricting the offender's parental responsibility unless it is not in the interests of justice to do so. We recognise that rape can occur within an abusive relationship, and this may make it difficult to prove at a criminal trial that it actually led to the child's conception. Where this is the case, but the court considers the rape may have led to the conception of the child, it will refer the matter to the family court via the local authority. This two-track process sends a clear message that we will protect all children born of rape, no matter the circumstances. The Government recognises the clear risk that serious child sex offenders pose to their children, and that is why we have brought forward Amendment 10, which will expand Clause 3 of the bill. It means that when someone is sentenced to 4 or more years for serious child sexual abuse against any child, the courts will automatically restrict their parental responsibility. The process will remain the same. At the point an offender is sentenced, the Crown Court will be required to make a prohibited steps order restricting the offender's exercise of parental responsibility for all the children for whom they hold. For an offender to be in scope of this measure, they will have to have demonstrated that they are unable to protect children and consider their welfare. That is why our measure includes all serious child sexual abuse offences against all child. And unlike the previous government's plans in the Criminal Justice Bill, this is not just limited to the offence of child rape. What is more, unlike the previous government, this government will actually deliver it. We are taking this important step today to protect even more children by preventing these individuals from taking active steps in their children's lives. We have recognised the strength of feeling on this issue, and I am grateful to my friends, the members, especially, as already mentioned, my honourable friend, the members for Bolsover, but also to my honourable friend, the member for Lowestoft, the member for Dwyfor Meirionydd, and Baroness Harman in the other place. They have been unwavering in their advocacy for the protection of children. Safeguarding children is of the utmost importance to this government, and this amendment ensures that we are doing just that.
I will happily give way to my honourable friend. She just mentioned some pioneering women in this place who've campaigned on this very issue for a number of years. But today's amendment stands on the shoulders of the brave victims and survivors who've spoken out over so long as well. This corrects a historic injustice whereby convicted sex offenders and paedophiles are children are protected from them, but before now their own children are not, and this government is now taking steps to make sure children who are through no fault of their own and their parents are protected from these vile sex offenders.
My right honourable friend is right. This bill is a testament to the victims and survivors, those brave victims and survivors who have spoken out about this injustice, and it is this government that is correcting that. My right honourable friend also talks about standing on the shoulders of brave, brilliant women in this place who have come before us and are still here. And it is quite apt now that I would also like to pay tribute to her, because new clause 13 concerning the misuse of non-disclosure agreements known as NDAs is a testament to her brilliant campaigning on this work. The government is very clear that NDAs must not be used to silence victims or witnesses of crime. Victims must be free to tell their truth, to seek help and to warn others. New Clause 13 will void NDAs to the extent that they seek to prevent a victim or a direct witness from speaking about criminal conduct to anyone and for any purpose. It will also protect disclosures about how the other party responded to the conduct or allegation so that victims are not prevented from sharing that full context of their experience. This measure builds on the Employment Rights Bill, which addresses the use of NDAs in cases of workplace harassment and discrimination. The measure will bind the Crown, but it will not apply to a very narrow cohort of specified agreements for national security reasons. It includes regulation-making powers to define accepted NDAs, where both parties genuinely wish to retain confidentiality and to ensure that certain disclosures will always be permitted. Once commenced, this measure will replace Section 17 of the Victims and Prisoners Act 2024, which allows limited disclosures to certain bodies. Together with the Employment Rights Bill, we are taking the necessary steps to ensure that NDAs cannot be misused to silence victims or obstruct justice. I'd now, Madam Deputy Speaker, like to briefly address a number of other concerns that have been raised and tabled as amendments. I will not preempt what will be said today in the debate, and I will give honourable and right honourable members the time to make their cases. However, I again thank those on all sides of the House for engaging with me and setting out their concerns. Turning to the amendment tabled by my honourable friend for Bristol East, which seeks to place a statutory duty on the Crown Court and HMCTS to determine whether an offender has parental responsibility for a child following sentencing. The amendment is very well intentioned, but it does risk creating practical difficulties. Determining whether a person holds parental responsibility has dependent children or children living in their household may require interpretation of family court orders, birth records, or informal caregiving arrangements. These are matters for the family court. Imposing such a duty on the Crown Court risks delaying sentencing. This government made a manifesto commitment to identify and provide support for children affected by parental imprisonment. And the Ministry of Justice and Department for Education are committed to working together to determine the best way forward to do this and deliver on that commitment, to make sure that every child gets the support that they need. The Right Honourable Member for Newark and the Honourable Member for Chichester have tabled amendments to remove the 4-year custodial threshold that applies to Clause 3 and to expand the number of cases where Clause 3 will apply. I want to be clear. This measure is not simply about when parental responsibility should be restricted. It is about when that restriction should happen automatically. We need to be mindful that this is a very novel measure. Removing the threshold would add a very large number of cases to what is an untested approach. More cases will also mean more applications to the family court, and it is important that we do not overwhelm the court and create delays which will put the vulnerable children already in the system at further risk. We want to be sure that there are no adverse consequences for those children and their families already in the family court, and that is why we have struck to keep this measure narrow, so we can understand exactly how it is working in practice and what those impacts are. As I said at second reading and through the passage of this bill committee, this is just the beginning. As part of implementing these measures, we will seek to understand how they operate in practice and ensure that there are clear routes through the family court for the parental responsibility of any perpetrator who does not fall into this measure to be restricted. The Right Honourable Member for Newark has also tabled amendments on the unduly lenient sentencing scheme. Parliament intended the ULS scheme to be an exceptional power, and I recognise the importance of finality in sentencing to avoid ongoing uncertainty for victims, those convicted, and society more broadly about the sentence to be served. However, I do recognise the exceptionally difficult circumstances for victims and their families in making a referral to the Attorney-General within the 28-day limit. The Law Commission is carrying out a review of criminal appeals and held a public consultation which sought views from a range of different individuals and reforms to the ULS scheme. It did include extending the time limit and offences in scope. The Government will, of course, carefully consider the review's final recommendations. However, today I want to assure members from across the House that I have heard the strength of feeling on the unduly lenient sentencing scheme. The amendments have been tabled on this matter, raise very important issues, and I will be continuing to look at this carefully as it progresses to the other place. On that, I make a commitment. The Honourable Member for Newark has also tabled an amendment on victim personal statements, a topic on which I must also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Member for the Forest of Dean, for his dedicated campaigning on. Victim personal statements can be an incredibly powerful way for victims and their families to tell the court how the crime has impacted them, and for the court to directly hear evidence about the harm caused when considering its sentencing of the offender. This is the victim's voice in the courtroom. It is important to understand that these statements are evidence submitted to the court to assist the court in determining sentences. As evidence, they are subject to strict rules which the court applies to ensure that the criminal justice process works fairly and effectively, and that is why the content is limited to explaining the impact of this crime. However, I will happily give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. It takes me back to a family and the father of young Violet Grace, who was killed in 2017, 4 years old, 80 miles an hour and 30 miles zone, and the people involved went missing. And during the court case some years later, where's my statement gone now? During the reading, they wanted to read out the victim's statement fully in the court, and the defendant's barrister objected, and the judge accepted that objection. The barrister gave the parents, the CPS barrister, gave the parents a copy of the victim's statement, highlighted with what they could not say. They went out of the courtroom to alter their statement. This was a young couple with a younger child. It was horrendous what happened to Victor Violet, and her mother-in-law. Life, the impact on her life was just horrendous. They went into that court and they felt like the criminal. They felt like they were like the defendants. They felt that they were doing wrong, and they then were asking, what can we say, what can we not say? The father has texted me this morning and he said, thank you, Mary. After all these years, I can see some light in the future. We don't want other people to suffer this. And I do hope that this goes through and that we can get something for this family. They've now got another little girl. But I just want to thank this government for getting round to it, because this bill has been going through and that's been going through, and it's just so terribly traumatic. The whole town feel it for these parents. But thank you so much for Violet Grace's parents.
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising the case of Violet Grace? She has been a tireless campaigner and supporter of the family for many years. I have had the privilege of meeting the Eunice family several times and sharing directly how their experience of their victim impact statement and the limitations placed on them as to what they could say in court has affected them and essentially silenced them and meant that their pain was not heard by the perpetrator. I am committed to working with them and the other Families for Justice campaign. The honourable member opposite, we've had extensive conversations on this, and any honourable member in this House, on looking for a way forward as to how we ensure that the victim's voice is best represented in sentencing. We do not need legislation for this, Madam Deputy Speaker. In fact, legislation could potentially make this worse in terms of re-traumatising victims by making them say two separate statements, limiting in statute even further the parameters of what can be said. I do not want to limit or silence any victims. I want to work with them to ensure that there is universality, there is support for them when completing their victim impact statements, and that the guidance is there so that anyone knows exactly what can be said in that impact statement. It is vitally important that we give victims a voice, and I am determined to achieve that. I know that my honourable friend, the member for Lowestoft, will speak to her amendment to place a duty on certain authorities to commission specific support services for victims and caregivers of victims of abuse and exploitation. Again, this is well intentioned, But we do not agree that it is helpful to place a statutory obligation on certain authorities to commission certain support services. The MOJ already provides grant funding to police and crime commissioners that is used to commission support services for victims of abuse and exploitation, which includes ring-fenced funding for sexual violence and domestic abuse services. It is for the PCCs to determine what best support is there for their local area. However, I again remain committed to working with her and others to ensure that victims get the best support that they need. My honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, has tabled an amendment which seeks to reform the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme in relation to compensating victims of child sexual abuse. This government is, of course, absolutely committed to supporting victims. However, we believe that reforming the scheme in one way that only benefits victims of child sexual abuse or any other single crime type would undermine its principle of universality. My honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, and I, as well as my honourable friends, the member for Warrington North and the member for Birmingham Northfield, and all of those who attended the Westminster Hall debate we had earlier this year, will know the strength of feeling towards the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme. It is not working. It needs reform, and I am committed to working with them and others and victims and survivors to not make this piecemeal and to look at how we can make it the most effective and sustainable scheme to provide compensation to victims. The honourable member for Maidenhead will no doubt speak to his amendment on support for families bereaved by homicide abroad. Bereaved families will, in many instances, need support tailored to their case. We have heard that these families need to be clearer about what that offer from UK agencies are and what the Homicide Service even is and how to access it. That is why we are working with departments across government, agencies and the Victims Commissioner to produce a clear, accessible guide to support families bereaved by homicide abroad. I am very grateful to the charity Murdered Abroad for working alongside us to make sure that that guidance delivers on its aims and we help those families who are stuck in limbo. I will come to a close by emphasising again the importance of this bill. It is a foundation for a better justice system, one that provides even greater protection for victims and delivers swifter, more efficient justice. It will not solve every issue we face overnight, but it is a strong, determined step forward, a signal that this government stands shoulder to shoulder with victims. And again, I want to sincerely thank members on all sides of this House for their engagement with this bill. We work together in this place, and this place is at its best when we do come together for the sake of victims and survivors. And I look forward to hearing this debate and responding to all of the views, and I'm looking forward to a really healthy debate. For now, I commend the government amendments and new clauses to this House.
New clause NC 13, victims' rights to make disclosures relating to criminal conduct.
The question is that government new clause 13 be read a second time. I call